I bought a cheap ranch in West Texas and discovered why nobody else wanted it. The thing that got me started screaming didn't have a face, but I could feel it watching me through the darkness like it had been waiting my entire life for me to arrive. Let me back up. I know how this sounds. Trust me, I've heard it all before. The skeptical comments, the psychological explanations, the whole "you were probably just stressed and imagining things" routine. My therapist certainly thought so. Before I stopped seeing her, my ex-girlfriend was convinced I'd had some kind of breakdown, and honestly, before that night in the storm, I might have agreed with them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Marcus Webb. And for the last 18 months, I've been trying to convince myself that what happened in Terlingua, Texas was explainable. It wasn't. I'm writing this down now because I promised myself I would. And because there's someone else out there who needs to know the truth about that property before they make the same mistake I did. In January 2022, I was a completely ordinary person living a completely ordinary life. I was 34 years old. Working as a remote software developer for a mid-sized company in Austin, making decent money, living in a one-bedroom apartment in South Congress that cost me nearly $2,000 a month. I had the kind of job that let me work from anywhere with decent internet, which seemed perfect. My relationship with Sarah had been slowly falling apart for about 2 years. We were that couple that kept saying we should talk but never actually did. And I was starting to feel like the walls of that apartment were closing in on me. I'd been born in Texas, grew up in San Antonio, went to UT for computer science, and had always felt that pull to come back to something more real than the sprawl of Austin suburbs. My parents had moved to California in the late 90s, which always felt like a betrayal somehow, and I'd stayed behind, telling myself I was a Texan in a way they could never be again. On a random Tuesday night in December 2021, scrolling through Zillow at 11 p.m. with a beer getting warm in my hand, I found the listing. It was a real estate website, nothing fancy. Just the standard photos and description. The property was near Terlingua, which is about as far west as you can go in Texas and still be in Texas. We're talking Big Bend National Park country, Marfa Lights territory. The kind of place where the sky is so big and the ground is so flat and empty that it makes you feel like you've fallen off the edge of civilization. The price was insane. 40 acres for $32,000. That's not a typo. For context, in Austin, you can barely get a quarter-acre lot for that price. The listing had been up for 7 months, which should have been my first red flag, but I didn't think about it that way at the time. I just saw opportunity. I saw escape. The house itself was a 1970s single-wide trailer, which I know sounds depressing as hell, but it had been remodeled at some point. The photos showed a small but functional kitchen, a living area, 2 bedrooms, and a full bathroom. There was a wooden deck built onto the front, and the surrounding landscape was all desert scrub, creosote bushes, the kind of Texas that looks like it's been waiting since creation for someone foolish enough to try to live there. I called the realtor that night. Her name was Patricia Gomez, and she answered on the first ring even though it was past midnight, which should have been my second red flag. But Patricia was kind and enthusiastic, talking about the property like she genuinely wanted me to have it. She told me it had belonged to an older gentleman who'd passed away, and his daughter was just trying to clear out the estate. The property had been in the family for almost 30 years. Why hasn't it sold? I remember asking her. She paused. It's isolated, she finally said. West Texas is beautiful, but it's not for everyone. Most people want to be closer to town, to services, to other people. Out there, you're about 40 minutes from the nearest gas station, an hour from Alpine, 2 hours from anything you'd call a city. You have to want to be alone. I remember thinking that was the most appealing thing I'd heard all week. Sarah was furious when I told her a few days later. We were in bed, morning light coming through the window, and I just casually mentioned that I was thinking about buying land in West Texas. She actually laughed, that sharp, bitter laugh she'd developed over the last year or so. "You're fucking kidding me," she said, not bothering to turn around to face me. "Marcus, we've been talking about maybe moving to California, maybe trying to make this work somewhere fresh, and you're telling me you want to move to the middle of nowhere, Texas." "We've been talking about a lot of things," I said carefully. "We haven't been actually doing anything." That started the conversation we should have been having for 2 years. The short version is that we both admitted we wanted different things. We both acknowledged that we'd been unhappy for a long time, and by the end of the week, she'd moved to her friend's place in North Austin. It was amicable, all things considered. We'd been together since college. which means we broke up like two people who were relieved it was finally over. I scheduled a trip to see the property for January 8th. Patricia arranged for me to pick up keys from her office in Alpine, which is the closest town to Terlingua. I'd never been to that part of Texas before, and I'm not sure what I was expecting, but nothing prepared me for what it actually felt like. I drove out from Austin on a Saturday morning, taking I-10 West, which is this magnificent stretch of highway that seems to go on forever. You leave the hill country behind and the landscape starts transforming. The trees get smaller and more sparse. The earth gets redder. Everything starts getting bigger. The sky opens up into this impossible blue that you can't imagine until you see it. By the time I hit the Pecos River, I felt like I'd driven through a dimensional portal into another version of Texas. The drive took about 6 hours. I hit Alpine around 2 p.m., found Patricia's office, got the keys. She gave me directions out to the property and told me the gate code, 1974, the year the house was built, she said. She also gave me her cell number and told me to call her before I left the property, just so she knew I'd gotten back safely. Cell service gets spotty out there, she explained. The drive from Alpine to the property took about 45 minutes on FM 170, which is this narrow, winding road that follows the Rio Grande. The landscape was hypnotic, rust-red cliffs on one side, desert on the other. The Chizos Mountains purple in the distance. I'd never seen anything quite like it. It felt ancient, like I was driving through a landscape that hadn't fundamentally changed in 10,000 years. The property itself was accessible via a small dirt road that turned off from the main highway. The gate was simple, just metal bars across the road with a keypad. I punched in 1974 and it swung open. I drove through. And the gate closed behind me with this quiet click that I remember thinking was ominous, though I laughed at myself for thinking it. Gate closes behind you, Marcus. Very horror movie. The road was about 3/4 of a mile long. Just packed dirt with creosote bushes on either side. My car, a 2019 Ford F-150 that I'd bought specifically because I thought I might do this kind of thing, handled it fine, but I could feel every rut. And then the road opened up and there it was. The house looked smaller in person than in the photos, which is usually the way, but it was charming in a lonely kind of way. The trailer was pale blue, with that wooden deck I'd seen pictures of. There was a small barn-like structure behind it. Maybe 50 feet away, that looked like it had been there longer than the house itself. The land stretched out in all directions, completely flat, with nothing but desert scrub and the occasional dead-looking tree. The sky was so impossibly huge that it made me feel dizzy just looking at it. I parked the truck and got out. The heat hit me like a wall, even though it was January. It was probably 85 degrees. And the sun was bright enough to make me squint despite my sunglasses. The smell was strange, dry earth dust, something faintly chemical that I later learned was creosote, and it was silent, not quiet. Silent, there's a difference. Quiet is the absence of noise. Silence is the absence of everything. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing, feeling the isolation settle over me like a blanket. The key worked in the lock and the door swung open onto a small living area. The interior was surprisingly pleasant. The previous owners had done actual work here. The floors were polished concrete, the walls were painted a warm cream color, and there was real furniture, a couch. A television, though I could already see myself never watching it, some shelves with books. It smelled closed up, but not unpleasantly so, just the smell of a house that had been empty for a while. I walked through slowly, taking mental inventory. The kitchen was small but functional, with dated appliances but clean counters. 2 bedrooms, both with windows that looked out at nothing but desert. The bathroom had been updated with a nice shower and a modern sink. There was a water heater in the back, a small electric panel with notes about the current system. Everything seemed fine, everything seemed normal, but there was something off, and I felt it even then, though I couldn't articulate what. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't like anything jumped out at me or sounded wrong. It was more subtle than that. It was the feeling of a place where something was missing, not a physical object, but something less tangible. Maybe it was the previous owner's presence that I was feeling, the absence of them, the lingering void they'd left behind. I spent a couple of hours at the property. I walked around the outside, kicked at the dirt. Looked at the barn empty except for old tools and some pieces of machinery I couldn't identify. I tried the water, it came out clear and cold from the taps. I checked the electrical system, tested the lights, everything worked. The solar panels on the roof seemed new, everything was functional. By 5 p.m. the sun was starting its descent and the light was changing, becoming more amber. the shadow of the trailer started stretching out impossibly long. I remember thinking about the old phrase about the sun setting on the frontier, about the last chances and the last chances turning into regrets. I pushed the thought away as melodramatic. I called Patricia as she'd asked me to. Told her everything looked great, that I was going to make an offer. She sounded relieved, which I now understand meant she was relieved to pass the problem on to someone else. The drive back to Austin felt shorter. Though that might have been because my head was full of plans. I found myself thinking about how I could furnish the place, how I could set up my office, how quiet it would be to work out there. No neighbors arguing, no sirens at 3 a.m. No one needing anything from me, just me, my code, and 40 acres of desert. I made an offer that night. Patricia came back with a counteroffer. We settled on $28,000. The sale was completed in less than 3 weeks. Which should have been another warning sign. Nothing closes that fast in real estate unless nobody wants it. But I was already making plans, already mentally moved. I told my company I was relocating, that I'd work remotely from now on. They didn't care, half the company was remote by that point anyway. Sarah and I handled the logistics of the breakup quickly and amicably. She got her stuff, I got the apartment until the lease was up. And we both pretended we were going to stay in touch, which we obviously haven't. It was like the relationship dissolved once we gave it permission to. I spent most of February getting the property ready and preparing for the move. I had furniture shipped. I stocked the place with supplies from H-E-B and Alpine, Bluebell ice cream, canned goods, pasta, basics. I set up my home office in the second bedroom, got my internet situation sorted with the existing satellite provider. Everything was ready. On March 1st, 2022, I packed up the last of my stuff from the Austin apartment, drove out to West Texas, and started my new life. The first week was exactly what I'd hoped for. It was quiet, peaceful, and beautiful. I'd wake up, drink coffee on the deck while the sun came up, work until noon, then spend the afternoon exploring the property or driving to Alpine for supplies. I established a routine quickly: work, exercise, cooking, reading at night. The isolation felt like a gift, not a curse. Every evening the sky would fill with stars so thick they looked fake, and I'd just stand there staring up at them, marveling at the fact that I'd never really seen stars until I moved out here. The locals weren't unfriendly exactly, but they were reserved. I'd go into the general store in Terlingua, a small town that barely qualifies as a town. More like a collection of buildings scattered in the desert, and people would nod at me but not really engage. The woman behind the counter, who introduced herself as Margaret, was pleasant enough. But when she found out I'd bought the place out past the old river road, something shifted in her expression. Nothing dramatic, just a tightening around the eyes. "That's a nice property," she said, in a tone of voice that suggested it definitely was not a nice property. "Yeah, I'm really happy with it," I said, not picking up on the subtext. The price was unbeatable, and it's perfect for my work. I get to be out here in the middle of nowhere and still make decent money. She nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone has just said something that confirms a suspicion you had about them. "Well, welcome to the area," she said. I'd go back to that interaction a lot in the following weeks. The second week I met my closest neighbor, which is a relative term. He was about 2 miles away, which is practically next door in West Texas. His name was Robert Castellanos. And he was probably in his late 70s, with that weathered look of someone who'd spent his whole life under this brutal Texas sun. He came by on horseback one afternoon, riding out of the heat shimmer like something from a Western movie. "Heard someone was moving into the old Patterson place," he said, introducing himself as he stood on my deck. I offered him water, which he drank quickly. He had pale blue eyes that seemed to look at everything except me directly. "Patterson," I said. The realtor said something about the owner passing away. "Yeah, that was about 5 years ago. His daughter had it after that. She didn't want it." He paused, looking out at my property like he was seeing something I wasn't. "Didn't want to be around it. Can't say I blame her." This was the moment where a normal person would have asked what he meant by that. I was developing a habit of not asking the direct questions when people made cryptic statements, which I think was a form of self-preservation on some unconscious level. I didn't want to know. I already owned the place. The point of having a mystery was that I got to live it without actually having to understand it. "It's beautiful out here," I said instead. "It's quiet out here," Robert said. "That's different from beautiful. Some quiet is peaceful. Some quiet is the kind of quiet that comes before something goes wrong." I remember laughing at that like he'd just made a joke. He didn't laugh back. He finished his water, thanked me, and rode back toward his property without saying anything else. That interaction bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I found myself thinking about it that night, turning it over in my head like a coin. What could he have meant? What was I supposed to understand about being quiet? But I'd made a commitment to myself to leave that kind of paranoia behind in Austin. I wasn't going to be the guy who read sinister meaning into everything. Robert was old and set in his ways, probably made mysterious comments all the time. It was probably just a personality quirk. The third week was when things started getting strange, though I didn't recognize them as strange at the time. It started with the cat. I hadn't planned on getting a cat. I'd never been a pet person. And I'd certainly never expected to pick one up in rural West Texas. But on the first warm afternoon, when I was working at my desk and needed to get out for a break, I walked out to the barn. And there was this gray tabby sitting in the middle of the floor, just looking at me. I have no idea where it came from. There were no neighboring houses close enough for it to have wandered from, and the area isn't exactly populated with wild cats. But there it was, and it was clearly not feral. It approached me immediately, meowing insistently, and rubbed against my legs. I brought it inside and called the vet in Alpine to ask about it. They said to keep an eye out for a lost pet poster. But as a short-term measure, I should feed it. There was a pet store in Terlingua, so I drove out and got some cat food in a litter box, not expecting to care about the animal but feeling obligated. I named it Dust. Because it was the color of the desert, Dust would be fine during the day. During the day, the cat was completely normal. It would nap in sunny spots, chase insects, be a typical cat. But at night, it would act strange. It would pace the house, meowing at nothing, and it developed this habit of refusing to go outside after dark. I put it out in the evening, and within 30 seconds, it would be back at the door, yowling to come in. When I tried to force the issue a couple of times, it would just sit outside the door, not moving, eyes very wide, until I let it back inside. I mentioned this to Patricia the next time I called about something else. I needed to order supplies and was asking if she had recommendations for places to get furniture in Alpine. She asked me how the move had gone. It's great, I said, really peaceful. Oh, and I ended up with a cat. I found it in the barn and it's pretty friendly, though it has this weird thing where it won't go outside at night. I've never had a cat before, but I assume that's just a cat thing. There was a pause that lasted too long. Most cats will do that, Patricia finally said. But if it's, really refusing to go outside, that's usually a sign that the cat knows something we don't. Animals are sensitive. They know when something's not right about a place. I remember thinking that was a strange way to phrase it, and thinking that Patricia seemed to know a lot of strange people who said strange things about this property. Should I be concerned? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. No, I'm sure it's fine. Cats are just weird. But she didn't sound like she believed that. During the second half of March, the weird things accumulated in small ways. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would be obviously wrong if you weren't living here experiencing all of it together. I'd wake up some mornings and find doors open that I'd distinctly locked the night before. The back door to the deck was the main one. I'd check it before bed, pull it hard to make sure it was sealed, and in the morning, it would be open an inch or two. I told myself I was probably not checking it properly, that I was misremembering, that the lock was faulty and it would drift open on its own. I got it checked by a handyman in Alpine, and he said it was fine. No problems, the lock works perfectly. I started leaving it locked and would be more paranoid about checking it each night. For a few nights it would stay locked, then it would be open again. And I'd feel this irrational spike of anxiety that I'd force myself to dismiss as anxiety. The dreams started in late March, nothing overtly frightening, but strange and persistent. I dreamed that I was walking across the property. But the landscape was slightly different than it actually was. The barn would be in a different location. The sky would be wrong colors, and I'd be looking for something, though I never knew what. I'd wake up with my heart racing and that feeling of having forgotten something important, the way you feel when you've left your house and can't remember if you turned off the stove. I started waking up at 3:17 a.m. almost every night with no reason. No sound would have woken me, no nightmare that I could remember. I'd just suddenly be awake and aware, lying in bed in the dark, listening to nothing. The silence of the house out here at 3 in the morning is a specific kind of silence. It's a sound in itself almost, a white noise made of absolute absence. One night, about 2.5 weeks into my time there, I heard something that definitely wasn't a dream or imagination. It was a sound outside the house, a low, keening wail that lasted for about 10 seconds. My first thought was coyote, which are common out here. My second thought was that it sounded nothing like a coyote. It sounded human almost. Except for the fact that no human could make that sound with their voice. It happened again the next night and the next, always around the same time, always from somewhere out in the darkness beyond my property. It would last just long enough for me to turn on the outside lights and look out the window, but there would be nothing visible, just the beam of the spotlight on the empty desert. I called Patricia. "That's probably coyotes," she said immediately. Which made me think she'd heard that question before. "I've looked it up," I said. "Coyotes have a different sound. This is different." "Well, there are a lot of things out there. Mountain lions sometimes, maybe a fox. The desert has nocturnal animals you don't see during the day." "Patricia," I said, "what was the thing with the previous owner? Why did he leave the property?" Another pause. "Marcus, like I said before, it's just isolated. People don't stay out there, it's not for everyone." "Because something happened," I pressed. "I don't know that anything specific happened," she said carefully, "but I will say that Mr. Patterson didn't spend much time at the property toward the end. His daughter said he'd stopped going out there. She'd have to check on things herself. Eventually, he moved to Alpine to be closer to town and his family. It wasn't the right fit for him. That was the most honest thing anyone had said to me about the place. It terrified me. I should have left then. That's the thing I think about most looking back. I had a window. I could have called Patricia. Told her I'd made a mistake, asked if there was any way out of the sale. I had maybe a 30-day period where I could have justified the decision as a mistake I'd corrected, but I didn't leave. And I think that was because some part of me wanted to know what was happening more than I wanted to be safe. That's the dangerous part of the human mind, I think. We're more curious than we are self-preserving. We'd rather face something terrible and understand it than be safe and ignorant. The dreams got worse. I started having the same dream almost every night. I was in the barn, even though I'd never spent much time in the barn while awake. The barn was filled with machinery and objects that I couldn't quite identify, covered in a thick layer of dust. And I was searching through everything, looking for something specific, though I never knew what, and the whole time I was searching, I could feel something else in the barn with me, standing just outside my line of sight. I'd spin around trying to see it, but it was always just in the periphery, just past where I could focus. Then I'd wake up, and for a few seconds, I'd still have that feeling that something was standing just outside my line of sight, just at the edge of my awareness, waiting for me to turn my head so it could, but I wouldn't turn my head. I learned not to turn my head immediately upon waking. By April 1st, I hadn't slept properly in over a week. I was becoming the kind of tired where everything starts feeling unreal. Work was becoming impossible to focus on. I'd sit at my desk, and the code on my screen would blur. I'd have to rewrite the same function 3 or 4 times because I couldn't remember what I was doing. I called my manager and told him I was sick. He told me to take whatever time I needed. Which was kind of him, but also made me feel worse because I couldn't actually explain what was wrong. That's when I started documenting things seriously. I bought a notebook and started writing down everything that felt strange. I know how that sounds. The first sign that someone is losing it is the journal, but at the time it felt important to have a record. March 27th, heard the sound again. Lasted maybe 12 seconds. Checked property at 2:45 a.m. with the spotlight. Nothing visible. Wind from the southwest. Note, dust would not go outside earlier that evening. She actually hissed at the door. March 28th, woke up at 3:17 a.m. again. No reason. Felt watched. Checked all locks twice. Back door was definitely locked. Checked it at 11 p.m. and again when I woke up. Still locked at 3:17. How much time am I spending on this? March 29th, the sound again. Different location. Seemed to come from the east side of the property, not the west where it usually is. Tried to record it on my phone, but only got wind noise. How does my phone not pick up a sound that loud? March 30th, called Patricia about noise. She was very quiet, asked if I was sleeping okay. I said I was fine. She didn't believe me. She offered to have someone come check the property. I said it wasn't necessary. March 31st, found a handprint on the inside of the living room window this morning. Definitely a hand, small fingers, maybe child-sized, but where did it come from? I live alone. I know I locked all the windows last night. I checked each one. The window has a lock and it was locked. The handprint is on the inside. I've been staring at it for an hour. Now I'm terrified to wipe it away because then I won't have proof that I didn't imagine it. April 1st, I was being stupid yesterday. The handprint was probably from before I moved in, maybe from Mr. Patterson's grandkid or something. I wiped it away. Now I can't stop thinking about the fact that I wiped away the evidence. Evidence of what? I'm losing my mind. That last entry is honest, at least. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. And the rational part of my brain was getting louder. telling me I was experiencing stress-induced paranoia, that I needed to leave, that there was no shame in admitting I'd made a mistake. But there was another part of my brain that was fascinated by the strangeness, that wanted to understand it. I started doing research. The internet out here was unreliable. Satellite internet is temperamental even when you have a good setup, but I had enough bandwidth for basic research. I started looking into the property's history. I went on the county records website and looked up the deed, the property history, any notices or liens attached to it. The property had been purchased in 1993 by someone named Richard Patterson. That was odd. The realtor said the current owner's family had owned it for 30 years, which would have been about 1991-1992. There was some confusion in my research, so I called Patricia and asked her directly. "Oh, the Patterson family," she said. "Yes, Richard purchased it in 1993. He owned it until about 5 years ago when he passed away and his daughter inherited it. She sold it to you. So they had it for almost 30 years, I said. Yes, that sounds right. Did anything happen during that time? I asked, like something notable. Patricia was quiet for a long time. Marcus, why are you asking me that? Because I keep hearing sounds and finding doors open and having dreams and feeling like something is wrong, and I need to know if I'm crazy, I thought. Instead, I said, just curious about the history of the place. The area has been inhabited for thousands of years, Patricia said carefully. Native Americans, Spanish settlers, ranchers, miners, there's a lot of history out there. Not all of it is pleasant, but that's true of a lot of places. Do you know anything specific about this property? I pressed. Not specifically, no. But the way she said it made it clear she knew something. I started trying to dig deeper. I went to the Terlingua Library, which was this small room in the community center with a few shelves of books and a single computer that seemed to have dial-up internet. The librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, asked if I needed help finding anything. I'm just interested in the local history, I said, trying to sound casual. I recently moved out here and want to learn more about the area. Something flickered in her eyes. The same thing I'd started to recognize in the faces of the locals when they found out where I lived. Which area did you move to? She asked. Out near the old river road, I said. Bought some property there. Ah, she nodded slowly. Well, there are some books about the history of the region I can show you, but there's not much specific to individual properties if that's what you're looking for. Any local legends or folklore? I asked. There's always folklore, she said. Desert places have folklore. Isolation and darkness do strange things to people's minds. They see things, imagine things, tell stories. But as she said it, she guided me to a shelf and pulled out a small self-published book titled Tales of the Big Bend, Oral Histories of the Davis Mountains and Surrounding Areas. This has some of the old stories people tell, she said. If you're interested in that sort of thing. I checked it out, even though I could tell from her expression that she didn't really want me to. That night, I sat on my deck with the book and read through the stories. Most of them were predictable, stories about lost Spanish gold, ghost towns, tales of frontier violence. But there was one story that made me pause. It was untitled, just a fragment, maybe a page and a half long. The introduction said it was a story told by an old Comanche man named Twicekild, recorded sometime in the 1960s by a folklorist. The story didn't have a clear narrative structure. It was more like a collection of statements. There is a place between the river and the high rocks where the ground remembers. Things that die there do not stay dead. Things that are hungry do not starve. The spirits of those who came before, they sometimes wear the shape of the land itself. My grandfather's grandfather saw it once, near the great water bend where the river turns like a snake. He said it looked like a woman made of dust and shadow. He said it called to him in his mother's voice. He did not answer. He walked backward for a mile until he could turn without seeing it again. Later people found him singing to the rocks for 3 days. After that, he could not speak again, only sing, and the songs had no words. The place was hungry. He said without speaking, but hunger could be satisfied. It wanted to be remembered. It wanted to be seen. My grandfather said the place had been fed before, long before the Spanish came, long before the Americans. It was ancient, and it was patient. Do not go to the place between the river and the high rocks. Do not go at night. Do not answer if something calls your name. Do not look at it directly. Do not let it inside. I read this story 3 times, and each time my chest got tighter. The place between the river and the high rocks, my property, was directly between the Rio Grande and the Davis Mountains. The wailing sound at night, the dreams about searching for something, the doors opening, the feeling of being watched. I was aware that I was probably doing that thing where people see patterns in random information because they're primed to see them. Pareidolia, but for narratives instead of faces. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just found a map to my own situation. I called Patricia again. "I want to know everything you know about this property," I said, "and I want you to be honest with me. Marcus, please, I'm not leaving. I just need to know what I'm dealing with." She was quiet for so long that I thought she might have hung up. "The property has history," she finally said. "The land itself, before Mr. Patterson bought it, before any modern owner. The native people in the area, the Comanche primarily and some others, they avoided it. They had stories about it, traditions about not staying there at night, but that was a long time ago and beliefs change." "What kind of stories?" I asked. "I don't know the specific stories," Patricia said. "I'm not from here originally. I moved to Alpine in the 90s, but there's a weight to certain places. You learn to feel it after a while. This place has that weight, Mr. Patterson felt it after a few years. That's why he moved away. His daughter refused to even stay there overnight. She would only visit during the day." "Why didn't you tell me this?" My voice came out louder than I intended. "Because you wouldn't have bought it," Patricia said quietly. "And I needed to move that property. The estate needed to be closed. I did my job, Marcus. I disclosed the property history. I told you the price was low because it was isolated. I didn't lie to you, I just didn't tell you everything." I hung up on her. I sat on my deck for hours that evening, watching the sun set, not turning on any lights as it got dark. Dust curled up against my leg, and for once, she seemed content to stay outside. Even the normal sounds of the desert, insects, the wind through the creosote, seemed to pause as darkness fell. I had a choice to make, and I made it in that darkness, watching the stars come out. I was going to stay. I was going to figure out what was happening. I don't know if it was bravery or stupidity or some combination of both, but something in me needed to understand the nature of what I was living with instead of just running away. I started actually researching instead of just feeling around in the dark. The next day, I drove to Alpine and went to the public library there, which was much better stocked than Terlingua's small collection. I spent the afternoon in the local history section, going through old newspapers on microfiche. The earliest article I found was from 1889, almost a century before Mr. Patterson bought the property. It was a brief mention in the Alpine Advocate, a small newspaper that doesn't exist anymore. Disappearance on Rio Grande. A surveyor named William Hastings, who was mapping the river valley near the Davis Mountains, failed to return to his camp on the evening of March 15th. A search party was organized, but no trace of Mr. Hastings was found. Foul play is not suspected, as the man was known to have mental afflictions and may have wandered away from the survey site deliberately. The search has been called off. There were other articles over the decades. A family that moved out onto the river valley and abandoned their property after only 6 months in 1912. A rancher who went insane and spent the last years of his life locked in an asylum. Never speaking, only singing wordlessly, that was in 1956. The article didn't specify where his property was, but the timeline matched the twice-killed story. The most recent article was from 1987, 13 years before Mr. Patterson inherited the place. I was getting confused about the timeline. Apparently he'd purchased it in 1993, not inherited it. "Local recluse found dead, Marcus Webb," the headline read, which made me do a double take. But the person in the article was someone named Marcus Jackson, not Webb. Small coincidence, but it made my skin crawl anyway. Marcus Jackson, a recluse who had lived on a property near the Rio Grande for the past 4 years, was found dead in his home on March 23rd. Cause of death is listed as a heart attack, though neighbors report that Mr. Jackson had seemed increasingly disturbed in the months before his death. One neighbor reported that Jackson would spend entire nights sitting on his property facing the darkness, not moving. His property was left to the state as he had no family. The death happened in 1987. Mr. Patterson bought property in the area in 1993. I didn't know if it was the same property, but the location matched and the timeline made sense. But here's the thing, none of these articles explicitly said anything was wrong with the property itself. You could read them as sad, isolated cases of people with mental health problems or bad luck. You could rationalize them. And the further back I went, the more the documentation became vague and interpretive. Was the 1912 family abandoning their property because something was wrong with it, or because of drought or financial hardship, or any number of mundane reasons? I was going in circles, gathering evidence that could mean anything or nothing. That night I set up my phone to record audio while I slept, just on the nightstand next to me. not because I expected anything, but because I was desperate for objective proof that I wasn't imagining the sounds. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. as usual. And there was audio on my phone, but when I played it back the next morning with shaking hands, all I heard was white noise and my own breathing. There was no other sound, no wailing from the desert, no footsteps, no whispers. Just 8 hours of me sleeping in an empty house. Except at one point, I had to rewind and listen several times to be sure I was hearing it right. There was a very faint sound, almost subliminal. It sounded like whispering, but not in any language I recognized, and it lasted for maybe 3 seconds, and then it was gone. I listened to that 3-second clip approximately 60 times over the course of the day. Each time I thought I could hear something different. Words that weren't quite words, a voice that might have been asking a question or might have been making a statement. Once I thought I heard my name in the whisper, but I knew that was probably my brain doing what brains do, finding meaning in noise. By the middle of April, I was surviving on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night, and most of that was not restful. I'd stopped going into Terlingua. I'd stopped working entirely. I'd called my manager and told him I was having a mental health crisis and needed to take a leave of absence. He'd told me to take all the time I needed, and I knew he was already looking for someone to replace me. The weird things were still happening, but I'd stopped trying to deny them or rationalize them. The handprints appeared on the inside of various windows. Small, child-sized handprints, always on the inside of locked windows. Always appearing overnight. I'd photograph them the morning I found them, and then I'd wipe them away, and by the next night there would be new ones. The sounds at night became more varied, sometimes the wailing. Sometimes what sounded like knocking on the metal siding of the trailer, sometimes the sound of footsteps walking around the deck. Sometimes, and this was the one that scared me the most, I'd hear what sounded like someone whispering right outside my bedroom window, right at the level of the bed. Dust had become increasingly distressed. She'd spend entire days pressed against me. Not moving, just existing in a state of high alert. She'd hiss at corners of rooms where nothing was visible. Once, I found her backed into the kitchen corner, every hair on her body standing up, staring at something directly in front of her that I couldn't see. I started leaving all the lights on all the time. The electric bill was apparently very high, but money seemed irrelevant at that point. I was running on fumes, physically, mentally, emotionally, and then on April 18th, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was in the barn, finally working up the courage to go through the items stored there during the daylight. The barn was full of old equipment, boxes of things, pieces of machinery that I couldn't identify. I was pulling down boxes from a high shelf, trying to understand what had been left behind, when one of the boxes broke open as I was bringing it down. Files spilled across the floor, old files from the 1980s and 1990s, filled with papers that looked official. I started picking them up and my hands started shaking. They were from Marcus Jackson's property, his will, his property deed, his medical records. Attached to the medical records was a letter dated from 1987, written by Dr. Harold Winters, a psychiatrist from Alpine. I read this letter 5 times and it's burned into my memory. March 23, 1987, to the Terlingua County Sheriff's Office. I am writing to provide context for the death of my patient, Marcus Jackson, whose body was discovered today at his residence. While the medical examiner has ruled the cause of death as cardiac arrest, I would like to provide additional information regarding Mr. Jackson's mental state in the months preceding his death. Mr. Jackson came to me in September of 1986, presenting with symptoms of severe insomnia, paranoia, and what I can only describe as an obsessive conviction that his property was inhabited by something non-human. He was intelligent, articulate, and in most respects, a reasonable and coherent individual. However, his insistence that there was something on his property became increasingly pronounced and resistant to medication. In his final session with me, approximately 2 weeks before his death, Mr. Jackson stated the following: "I know how this sounds. Dr. Winters, I know that you think I'm having a breakdown, but I'm not imagining this. I've seen things I can't explain. I've found things that prove I'm not alone here, and I've made a decision. I'm going to let it happen. I'm going to stop fighting it. Whatever it wants from me, I'm going to give it. Maybe that will be enough. Maybe that will let me sleep." I attempted to have Mr. Jackson committed to psychiatric care, but he was coherent enough and not an immediate danger to himself or others, so I was unable to proceed. He did not return for his follow-up appointment. When he was found, he was sitting on his bed, fully clothed, hands folded in his lap. The door to his home was unlocked. It is my professional opinion that whatever Mr. Jackson was experiencing, real or imagined, created such stress that his heart simply could not continue to function. I am writing this because I believe the property itself may have been a factor in Mr. Jackson's psychological deterioration. I recommend that the property be examined for any conditions that might cause the psychological symptoms he exhibited. High levels of naturally occurring radiation, lead contamination, carbon monoxide leaks, or other environmental factors that might cause hallucinations. Respectfully submitted, Dr. Harold Winters, M.D. Psychiatry. I sat there on the barn floor, holding this letter, and I felt something inside me break apart. Marcus Jackson, Marcus Webb, two Marcuses, one who'd lived in this place and died, and one who'd now bought it 87 years later. And he'd said the same things I was experiencing. He'd heard things, felt watched, found evidence that someone or something was there, and in the end, he'd given up. I carried the papers back to the house in a daze. I spent the rest of the day in my office, reading through everything. There was a journal in the box. Actually, there were multiple journals, documenting Jackson's time on the property from 1983 to 1987. Reading his journals was like reading my own diary. The timeline was different, but the experience was identical. The sounds at night, the doors opening, the feeling of being watched, the discovery that locals knew something but wouldn't say. The realization that previous residents had experienced the same things. But Jackson's journals also contained something else, his attempts to communicate with whatever was there. By his final journal entry, he'd stopped trying to deny what was happening and started trying to establish some kind of dialogue. There were drawings of symbols he claimed to have found on the property, transcripts of what he claimed the thing was saying to him. Though the transcripts didn't make sense to me, they were fragments, broken language. Remembers when home here, remembers when hours, remembers when called, but no one came, no one answered, no one remembered. It was the writing of someone whose mind was breaking down, interpreting reality in ways that made sense to his fractured perception. Or it was the writing of someone trying to understand something that operated on a different level of reality entirely. And their language couldn't accommodate it. The final entry, dated March 22, 1987, the day before he died, read, "I understand now. It's been calling to me since I arrived. Not with words, with feelings. I understand what it wants. It wants to be known. It wants to exist in someone's mind. It wants to be acknowledged. Maybe it's been waiting for a long time. Maybe people got better at ignoring it, or maybe it got weaker, and now it's remembering how to be loud again. But I understand, and I'm ready. Tomorrow I'll let it in. I'll stop fighting. I'm so tired of fighting." I put the journals down and went to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. I called Patricia that night. "You knew," I said. Not bothering with hello, "You knew about Marcus Jackson. You knew that someone died in one of these properties. How many properties are we talking about? Is this the same one? Marcus, is this the same one?" A very long pause. "I don't know for certain. The records are old and property lines have changed. But yes, I believe the Marcus Jackson property is in the same area as the land you purchased. It's possible you bought the exact same property that was subdivided after his death. Why would you sell someone a property where the previous tenant literally died after having a psychotic breakdown? Why would anyone do that?" "Because it's been 4 decades, Patricia said, and her voice was very calm, very careful. "Because a lot of people lived on that land between Jackson's death and now. Because it's possible that nothing will happen to you. Not everyone is susceptible to whatever happened to Jackson. Mr. Patterson lived there for 30 years. His daughter never even slept there, but she survived. Some people experience the phenomena, and some people don't. And some people experience it and don't let it destroy them." "What do you mean, the phenomena?" I asked. "What exactly am I experiencing?" "I don't know," Patricia said, and she sounded honest. "I've never lived there. But I've sold 5 properties in that area over the past 20 years. 3 of them were returned to me, one with a suicide on the property, one with the family simply abandoning it in the middle of the night. The Patterson property is the success story. He lived there for 30 years and died naturally in town, not on the property, so it's not a 100% death sentence. That's not exactly comforting. I know it's not. I'm sorry, Marcus. I should have told you more, but you were willing to buy it, and I was tired of trying to sell that property. I made a bad choice, and I'm sorry." I believe she was sorry. In the abstract sense that people are sorry about things that don't affect them, but sorry didn't help me. I hung up and sat in my lit-up house, every light blazing, dust pressed against my side, and I made a decision. I was not going to let this kill me. I was not going to be Marcus Jackson. and I was not going to run away and leave whatever this was to sit here and wait for the next person to buy the property. I was going to fight the next day. I started preparing. I called my bank and was extremely grateful that I still had most of the money from the sale of my Austin apartment. Sarah had taken her half, but I still had about $90,000 in savings. I ordered supplies online. Industrial-grade lights, batteries, first aid equipment, freeze-dried food, bottled water. I stocked up enough supplies that I could theoretically never leave the house again. I researched every mention of the phenomena online. I found forums where people discussed paranormal activity, skeptic forums, believer forums, everything in between. I read about Marfa lights, about UFO sightings in West Texas, about El Chupacabra, about La Llorona. I read academic papers on mass hallucinations and environmental factors that might cause psychological symptoms. And I researched the property's actual history, going back further than I'd managed to before. What I found was that the land had been Comanche territory before the Spanish arrived. The Spanish had built a small mission nearby in the 1700s, but it had been abandoned. The reason for abandonment wasn't clearly documented. But one letter from a Spanish priest mentioned a spiritual affliction upon the land and voices that troubled the sleep of those who dwelt there. By the 1800s, American settlers had claimed the land, and over the next 100 years, various people had tried to make a life there. The pattern was consistent. People would move to the land, experience phenomena, and either adapt, flee, or break. The ones who adapted seemed to do so by accepting the phenomena rather than fighting it. The ones who fled seemed to do okay. The ones who tried to fight and couldn't seem to be the ones who broke. I decided to try something different. I decided to try to communicate. This was probably stupid. In fact, I'm certain it was stupid. But by the end of April, I was operating on a level of desperation that transcended normal decision-making. I set up what I can only describe as a seance, though I felt ridiculous doing it. I drew symbols based on the ones in Marcus Jackson's journals. I burned sage, which I'd bought online and felt incredibly stupid acquiring. I sat in the middle of my living room with every light off except for candles, and I waited. And I whispered into the darkness, "I know you're here, I know you've always been here. What do you want?" I'm not going to lie and say something dramatic happened. Nothing did. I sat there feeling stupid for about an hour. And then I turned on the lights and went to bed, and I didn't hear anything unusual. But the next morning I found something. In the dust on my kitchen table, dust that definitely hadn't been there the night before, there was a symbol. It looked like it had been drawn by a finger, a simple shape, two curved lines that might have been a face or might have been waves. It was crude, childlike, exactly like the symbols in Jackson's journals. Someone was answering me. I took a picture of it before wiping it away, and then I put the picture in my notebook. Over the next week, I had a conversation with something. I'd ask questions to the empty house, and the next morning, there would be symbols or disturbances in the dust, or sometimes just marks on the windows where someone or something had been pressing from the outside. I asked, "How long have you been here?" The answer, conveyed in symbols and disturbances, I interpreted as best I could. Before, always before. I asked, "What are you?" The answer. A drawing that looked like a person, but with lines coming off it like radiation or wind or something indefinable. I asked, "Why are you here?" The answer. Home, remembers, mourns. I asked, "What do you want from me?" And the answer to that came not in symbols, but in a moment of genuine clarity that happened while I was lying in bed at 3 in the morning. I suddenly understood, with a certainty that I can't explain and have no rational justification for, that the thing wanted to be remembered, it wanted to be acknowledged, it wanted someone to stay long enough to know it was real. Everything that had happened, the sounds, the presences, the psychological torment, was not malice, it was desperation. It was something that had been alone for such a long time that it had forgotten how to exist except through disruption and dread. For Marcus Jackson, that realization had been fatal, but I was different from Marcus Jackson. Or I decided to be different. I made a commitment that night. I would stay. I would learn to live with this thing, whatever it was, and I would not let it destroy me. I stopped fighting the phenomena when I'd hear sounds at night. Instead of turning on lights and barricading myself, I'd sit up and listen. When I'd feel the presence of something, I'd acknowledge it silently. When I'd find symbols or handprints, I wouldn't photograph them obsessively, I'd just clean them up and move on, and something shifted. The sounds didn't stop, but they became less terrifying. The feeling of being watched remained, but it became less alien. More like existing in the same room as another consciousness that meant no harm. Dust began to relax. She'd still be cautious at night, still reluctant to go outside after dark, but she wasn't in a constant state of terror anymore. And my sleep improved. I started sleeping through the night. It took about 2 weeks for the full transition to happen. By the beginning of May, I'd returned to some semblance of normalcy. I started working again, bit by bit. At first just responding to emails and then actually writing code. I started keeping regular hours. I drove into Terlingua once a week for supplies. I called my parents and told them a sanitized version of what had happened, stressed out from the move, having some trouble adjusting, but things were better now. By the end of May, I'd been at the property for 3 months. And I'd reached what I can only call a détente with whatever inhabited the land. I won't pretend it's pleasant, it's not. I still hear things at night that make my heart rate spike. I still occasionally find evidence of presences in the house. There are still times when I'll walk into a room and feel a profound sense of wrongness that my brain can't quite articulate, but I'm alive and I'm sane and I'm still here. Then in early June, Sarah showed up. She texted me first, "Hey stranger. I'm in the area for work, can I come by and see the place?" Sarah had moved to California in May, had taken a job with a tech company in San Francisco. I hadn't heard from her in months. I wasn't sure how to feel about her suddenly wanting to visit. But it felt like a good test of sorts. Maybe this place was safer now. Maybe I could have visitors without it being a disaster. I told her she could come by on Saturday. She arrived in a rental car at around noon. And I could immediately see in her face that she was shocked by how isolated the property was. She'd known I was moving out here, but knowing it intellectually and seeing 40 acres of empty desert was different. "Holy shit, Marcus," she said. "Looking around, this is really far." "Yeah, it is," I agreed, "but I like it. Come inside, I'll make coffee." We spent the afternoon talking, catching up, and I could see her relax. The house was normal in the daylight. I was normal in the daylight. She asked about the property, and I told her a censored version. It was isolated, it had taken some adjustment, but I was happy now. She seemed to believe me. "You look different," she said, "thinner. Are you eating?" "I eat fine," I said, "just the stress of the move, I guess. I'm better now." She stayed until evening, and we had dinner together. She suggested she should head back to Alpine before dark to make sure she got there while it was still light. I agreed immediately, even though I could feel something tightening in my chest, a warning I didn't want to acknowledge. She left at around 6 p.m., saying she'd text me when she got to Alpine. I watched her drive off. The red tail lights of her rental disappearing down the dirt road, and I felt a wave of relief that made me realize how anxious I'd been the whole time she was here. My phone buzzed about 20 minutes later, made it safely. "Thanks for letting me visit. You were right, it's beautiful out there. Weird but beautiful. Take care of yourself." I replied, "Thanks for coming, take care." And that was that. She was gone and things returned to normal. The rest of June was quiet. In the good way, I was in a rhythm with the property and whatever inhabited it. Work was fine. I was sleeping well. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I was actually living a life here rather than simply surviving it. And then, on June 21st, everything went wrong in a completely different way. It started with a sense of something being off, which you'd think I'd be used to by now, but this was different. This wasn't the normal wrongness of the property. This was something new. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. as I usually did, but instead of the normal silence, I heard something. Not the usual sounds, the wailing or the knocking or the whispers. This was different. This sounded like wind, but structured wind. Like the air itself was being manipulated into a pattern, and underneath that sound was something else. A presence that felt different from the one I'd learned to coexist with. I lay in bed, every nerve in my body on alert, and listened to the sound build. It wasn't coming from inside the house. It was coming from outside, from the desert beyond my property. Dust jumped off the bed and ran into the living room, which she never did. Dust was comfortable here now. But suddenly she wasn't. Suddenly she was terrified in a way she hadn't been in weeks. I got out of bed and turned on lights. The house suddenly felt very small. I looked outside and the desert was wrong. There was light coming from somewhere. Not the light of the moon or stars, but a strange, sickly amber light that seemed to come from no particular source. It was diffuse, like the whole landscape was glowing from within. The wailing started then, but it wasn't the familiar wailing I'd come to recognize. This was louder, and it sounded wrong in a way I can't describe. It sounded like something was tearing. I called Patricia, even though it was 3 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, which told me she'd been waiting for my call. "Marcus," she said before I could say anything, "if you're calling, something's happened." "There's something outside," I said. "It's different. The light is wrong." And the sound, you need to get inside and lock all the doors, Patricia said, speaking quickly. Turn off the lights and stay away from the windows. What's happening? I demanded. I don't know for certain, Patricia said, but every few years. Something changes out there. The people who have been on that land for a while, they talk about it. The thing that lives there, it's usually dormant. It's almost peaceful if you can call something like that peaceful. But sometimes it wakes up fully. And when it does, Marcus, has anyone been to your property recently? Anyone besides you? Sarah. Oh God, Sarah had been here just hours ago. My ex-girlfriend came by today, I said, but she left before dark. She was fine. She made it to Alpine. There was a silence on the other end that went on too long. Patricia, did she sleep there? Patricia asked quietly. No, she left before evening. I wouldn't have let her. It doesn't matter if she slept there, Patricia said. If she was on the land, it knows her scent, it knows her presence. That might be enough. Enough for what? I practically screamed. For it to call to her, Patricia said, to try to pull her back. Marcus, do not go outside, do not leave the house. Stay inside with all the doors locked and the lights on. It will pass. It always passes, but you need to survive the night. She hung up. I stood in my living room, holding my phone, and looked at Dust, who was pressed against the couch. Every muscle tense. The light outside was getting brighter. The sound was building. And I realized with absolute certainty that something was being pulled toward my property. I didn't know if it was Sarah, or if it was the something using her as a beacon, or if Patricia was completely wrong about all of this. But something was coming. I went through the house systematically, checking locks. All the doors were locked. All the windows were locked. I turned on every light in the house, battery-powered lanterns too, creating a bubble of light around myself. And I settled in to wait. The sound built for hours. The light remained. That sickly amber glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I sat on my couch, Dust against me, and I listened to the wind that wasn't wind, and I watched shadows move across the curtains even though nothing visible was casting them. At some point around 5 a.m., I heard the sound of an engine. At first, I thought it was police or someone who'd called them. I looked out the window and saw a car pulling up the dirt road, coming from the direction of the highway. It was moving fast, too fast for the uneven terrain. As it got closer, I recognized it. It was Sarah's rental car. My breath caught in my throat. I watched the car come to a stop in front of my house. I watched Sarah get out. And even from a distance, even in the strange amber light, I could see that something was very wrong with the way she was moving. She walked toward the house like she was sleepwalking, her movements smooth but uncoordinated. Like someone was controlling her body by pulling invisible strings. I ran to the door, which was locked, and I watched through the window as Sarah walked directly toward it. She didn't knock, she just reached out and tried the handle. When it didn't open, she tried again. Then she stood there, staring at the door, her face blank and empty of any emotion I recognized. Sarah, I called through the door. Sarah, can you hear me? She turned slowly to look at the window. And I could see her eyes. They were wrong. There was something behind them that wasn't Sarah. Go home, she said, and her voice was not quite right either. It sounded like there was an echo in it, like someone else was speaking along with her. You have to go home. Sarah, it's Marcus. Come inside, let me help you. You can't help me, she said, and now she was smiling, which was worse than the blankness. You stayed. You're supposed to leave. Everyone's supposed to leave. And then it can sleep again, but you stayed. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I didn't know it would do this. I didn't know it could do this. She turned away from the house and walked back toward her car. I watched helplessly as she got in, started the engine, and drove back toward the highway. The whole encounter had lasted maybe 3 minutes. I immediately called her cell phone, but it went to voicemail. I called it again and again. Then I called information and got the number for the car rental agency and called them, explaining that I needed to report a car that might be involved in an accident. The representative told me the car was currently being tracked by GPS, and they could contact the driver. They gave me a phone number for the sheriff's office to call if I was concerned about the driver's safety. I called the sheriff's office. I reported that my ex-girlfriend might be in distress. Gave them her name and description and the car information. They said they'd send someone out to check on her. 40 minutes later, the sheriff called me back. They'd found her about 15 miles from my property, parked at a rest stop. Asleep in the car, she was disoriented when they woke her up, but otherwise unharmed. She had no memory of the last few hours. The last thing she remembered was leaving my property in the afternoon. The sheriff asked me why he was calling about her. And I made up something about her mentioning she was feeling sleepy and asking me to check in. He seemed skeptical, but he said she was fine and would be heading back to Alpine. I hung up and sat in the light of my living room and shook. When it was full daylight, I called Sarah directly. she answered confused, apparently having been questioned by local law enforcement and still trying to understand what had happened. I drove out to Alpine and just lost time, she said. The last thing I remember is leaving your place around 6. The next thing I know, there's a sheriff tapping on my window at 6 in the morning at some rest stop I don't remember going to. You came back, I said. You came back to the property in the middle of the night. What? No, I drove straight to Alpine. Sarah, the sheriff found you 15 miles away. That's not the direction of Alpine. There was a long pause. I don't remember, she said quietly. I don't remember any of that. Don't come back here, I said. Please don't come back. And she didn't. She drove back to San Francisco the next day. We haven't spoken since, but I've thought about that night a lot. What I think happened is this. Something was called to Sarah's presence. Maybe it had been alone for so long that any new person felt like an opportunity. Maybe the land had wanted her to stay, to settle, to become part of its existence. And when I didn't let it have her, it had tried to pull her back. The other explanation, the one that's harder to think about, is that Sarah left willingly. That something in her was drawn to the property, and she'd driven herself back there in a fugue state and then been rejected. And sent away. I don't know which is true. I'm not sure I want to know. What I do know is that the incident changed things. The light faded as dawn came, the wind sound stopped, and the presence I'd come to coexist with seemed to retreat into itself. I never heard from Patricia again. She didn't answer her phone, and when I drove to Alpine to check on her, her real estate office was empty. I talked to the property manager of the building, who said Patricia had closed her office and moved away. July and August passed quietly, almost peacefully. I established a full routine. I was back at work, fully functioning. I had weekly video calls with my parents. I went into town regularly. To all external observations, I was fine. I was a person living in isolation, yes, but a person who was coping with it well. The phenomena continued, but at a lower level. I'd still hear things at night. I'd still find small marks and symbols. But there was no sense of malice or intensity to it. It felt like coexistence, but something fundamental had changed. The thing, the presence, whatever it was, had learned that I wouldn't let it consume me, that I wouldn't let it have others. That I was willing to stay and acknowledge it without letting it destroy me. In return, it seemed to have accepted me. I'm still here, now in the middle of November, writing this account of what happened. I've been at this property for 9 months. By Marcus Jackson's timeline, I'm living on borrowed time. He made it 9 months before he gave up. I'm conscious that I'm approaching the anniversary of when he decided to let go, but I'm not going to do that. I'm still working, still functioning. The property is still isolated and still strange, but it's mine now in a way that goes beyond legal ownership. This is my place, and the thing that lives here is something I've learned to live with, to acknowledge. Without letting it define my entire existence, Dust has become a comfortable companion, no longer anxious but resigned to our shared habitat. We've reached an understanding, all three of us, me, the cat, and whatever exists just beyond the edge of my perception. The last thing I'll say is this. If you're reading this because you're thinking about buying property in rural West Texas, particularly property that seems too cheap, that's been on the market too long, or that has a history of people leaving unexpectedly, I won't tell you not to, but I will tell you to go into it with your eyes open. Some places are old, some places have memories. Some places have presences that have been there so long that they've almost become part of the landscape itself. And if you settle on such a place, you have to decide whether you're going to fight it, flee from it, or accept it. Fighting will destroy you, fleeing might work, but you'll spend the rest of your life wondering. But accepting might let you build a life, and maybe that's all any of us can do, build a life in the places that frighten us. And hope that eventually we find a way to coexist with the darkness. I'm still out here, I'm still alive, and I'm still learning how to live with the thing that was here before I arrived and will be here long after I'm gone. If you've read this far, you probably think I'm either crazy or lying. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. All I can tell you is what I've experienced and how I've managed to survive it. That will have to be enough. Marcus Webb, November 2022, Terlingua. Dagzo. The deed to Yellow Horse Canyon said nothing about the door. I'm writing this from a hotel room in Albuquerque, and I'm looking at the door every 30 seconds to make sure it's still locked. My hands are shaking so bad I can barely type. I told myself I wouldn't post this. I told myself I'd just try to forget the 3 months I spent in that hellhole outside Terlingua, that I'd let the therapists and the pills do their work and move on. But last night I found a Polaroid in my glove compartment. It was a picture of the back porch of the ranch, the one I burned down, and standing in the window was something that looked almost like a person but wasn't. The photo was dated yesterday. If you're reading this and you've ever considered buying cheap land in Brewster County, hell, if you've ever driven Highway 118 south of Alpine at night, you need to read every word. You need to know that some places in Texas aren't empty because nobody wanted them. They're empty because something else got there first. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in Ohio, and until April of last year, I worked as a junior systems analyst for a logistics company in Columbus. Remote work, Zoom calls, the whole pandemic routine. When the company announced they were making the remote positions permanent, I did what a lot of millennials dream about. I looked for land, not just any land. I wanted somewhere with sky. Somewhere I could see the stars, maybe keep a few goats, grow tomatoes that actually tasted like tomatoes. I was tired of gray winters and HOA meetings and neighbors who could hear me sneeze through the drywall. I found the listing on a Tuesday. 40 acres in Brewster County, Texas, about 20 miles southeast of Terlingua. The price was absurd, $1.45. Zero for 40 acres. For context, that's less than I'd paid for my Subaru. The photos showed a single-wide trailer that had seen better days, a windmill that still turned, and views of the Chizos Mountains in the distance. The ad mentioned private canyon access and off-grid potential. What it didn't mention, what nothing mentioned, was Yellow Horse Canyon, or the structure inside it, or the door. I called the realtor, a woman named Marjorie Pickett out of Alpine. She had that slow, careful West Texas drawl, the kind that makes everything sound like it's being considered from a great distance. She told me the previous owner, a man named Hollis Ketchum, had passed away intestate. The state had held the property for 2 years trying to find heirs, then auctioned it off to cover back taxes. She said the trailer was livable, the well was good. And the only neighbors were cattle ranchers 3 miles east who mostly kept to themselves. Any catches? I asked, standing in my Columbus apartment looking at the snow coming down in April. Long pause. Well, it's remote, honey, real remote. You got about an hour's drive to the nearest HEB in Alpine. Cell service is spotty to non-existent, and the road in is rough, 4-wheel drive absolutely necessary. I should have heard something in her voice, a hesitation maybe. But I was too busy imagining myself drinking coffee on a porch while the sun rose over Big Bend. I put in an offer that day, full price, cash, using my savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother. The closing took 3 weeks, by mid-May. I was loading up a U-Haul trailer with my desk, my computer, and 2 cats named Milo and Otis. The drive down took 2 days. I crossed into Texas at Texarkana and immediately felt the scale of the place change. Everything got bigger, the sky. The trucks, the distances between exits. I stopped at a Buc-ee's outside Temple and bought enough beef jerky to survive an apocalypse, plus a hat that said "Don't mess with Texas" because I thought it was funny. I took I-10 west. Passing through San Antonio, then hugging the border past Fort Stockton. The land flattened out, then broke into desert hills. The heat hit me like a physical force when I stepped out for gas in Ozona, 105 degrees, and it was only 10 in the morning. I pulled into Alpine around 6 p.m. on a Thursday, checked into a Holiday Inn Express, showered for 20 minutes, then met Marjorie at a barbecue place called Rita for the key handoff. She was older than I expected, maybe 70. With silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that looked like they'd been squinting into the sun for decades. She handed me an envelope with the deed and a single key. "Road, rougher than I remembered," she said, not touching her tea. "You got plenty of water in that truck, 2 cases," I said. "Good, don't try driving in after dark tonight. Stay in Alpine, head out at first light. And Daniel," she paused, her fingers worrying the edge of her napkin. "If you find anything out there that doesn't make sense, any old structures, anything like that, don't go inside, just call me." I laughed. "Like what, a meth lab?" She didn't smile. "Just call me." I should have listened. Instead, I was impatient. I wanted to sleep in my own place, even if that place was a single wide in the desert. I bought supplies at the HEB, cases of Topo Chico, Bluebell ice cream, tortillas, beans, rice, a generator, flashlights, batteries. A shotgun the sporting goods guy convinced me I needed for snakes, and headed out around 8 p.m. The sun was setting, painting the Davis Mountains purple and orange. Highway 118 south of Alpine is one of those roads that makes you understand why Texans talk about driving differently. It's straight until it isn't, winding through creosote flats and ocotillo forests, past road signs riddled with bullet holes. I passed the turnoff for the McDonald Observatory, saw the white domes gleaming against the darkening sky. Then the road got worse. I turned onto FM 170, then onto a county road that was just packed dirt and gravel. Following Marjorie's handwritten directions, my GPS lost signal around 9. The last bar on my phone disappeared shortly after. I was driving by headlights, crawling over rocks and dry washes, my F-150 jouncing like a boat in a storm. The darkness out there is different, absolute swallowing. No light pollution from cities, no neighbors' porch lights, just stars so thick they looked like someone had spilled sugar across black velvet. I found the gate at 10:30. It was rusted iron hanging open with a faded sign that said "Ketchum" in letters so peeled they looked like scars. I drove through, checking my odometer. 3 miles of what could generously be called a road, really just 2 ruts through creosote and lechugia. The headlights caught eyes glowing in the dark, deer, javelinas, maybe coyotes. The air smelled like dust and ozone and something else. Something green and vegetal that I later learned was canyon rain. The trailer appeared suddenly, materializing out of the darkness like a shipwreck. It was a 1970s model, white with turquoise trim, the paint faded to the color of old teeth. A porch wrapped around the front, and the windmill I'd seen in the photos creaked in the light breeze. Behind it, the land rose into broken hills, and I could see the dark line of a canyon cutting through the terrain. I parked, exhausted. My back screaming from the drive. The trailer smelled like cedar and mothballs when I unlocked it, but it was surprisingly clean. Someone, Marjorie's people, probably, had stocked the fridge with basics and made up the bed with fresh sheets. I let the cats out of their carriers. Milo immediately hid under the couch. Otis sat at the sliding glass door, staring out into the darkness, his tail puffed to 3 times its size. "Hey," I said, scratching his ears. "It's okay, buddy, home." He didn't move, just stared, and then he hissed, this low, guttural sound I'd never heard him make before, and bolted under the bed. I told myself it was the stress of the drive. I ate a peanut butter sandwich standing up. Washed it down with lukewarm water, and fell into bed without even taking off my boots. The next morning, Texas introduced herself properly. I woke up at 6 a.m. to light so intense it hurt my eyes. The heat was already building. Pressing against the windows, I stepped out onto the porch with coffee, Folgers, because I hadn't learned better yet, and just stood there, stunned. The landscape didn't look real. It looked like a movie set. Red rock formations jutted from the desert floor like ancient temples. Creosote bushes stretched to the horizon, their tiny leaves shimmering with silver light. The Chizos Mountains sat 50 miles to the southeast. Blue and hazy and impossibly beautiful, and the quiet, it wasn't silent exactly. There was wind and the creak of the windmill and the buzz of insects, but it was a vast quiet. A spacious quiet that made my Ohio-raised brain feel like it was expanding. I spent that first day exploring the property boundaries. The 40 acres were roughly square, marked by barbed wire that had mostly fallen down. I found the well hand-dug. Stone-lined with a new pump that Marjorie had installed, the water tested clean. I found a shed full of rusted tools and mason jars and old copies of Progressive Farmer from 1983. I found a half-buried foundation where someone had tried to build a stone house decades ago and given up. And late in the afternoon, sweating through my shirt, I found the canyon. It wasn't on the survey map Marjorie had given me. The deed mentioned access to seasonal water features, but not this, a slit in the earth maybe 50 feet wide at the mouth, narrowing as it cut into the hills. The walls were red and orange limestone, banded with purple. Cottonwoods grew at the bottom, their leaves whispering. There was water down there, I could hear it trickling. I should have turned back. I tell myself that every night when I close my eyes, but I was curious, I was stupid. I scrambled down the slope, grabbing onto rocks, my boots slipping on scree. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as I descended. The walls rose up around me, blocking out the sun. It felt like entering a cathedral or a throat at the bottom. The canyon floor was sandy, dotted with boulders. The creek, more of a trickle, really ran over smooth stones. I followed it inland, walking for maybe 10 minutes, until the walls were only 10 feet apart and the sky was just a blue ribbon overhead. That's when I saw the door. It was set into the canyon wall, right where the rock face curved. Wooden, weathered gray, with iron hinges that looked medieval. A frame surrounded it, rough-hewn timber shored up with stones. It looked like the entrance to a root cellar or a mine, but older than anything I'd seen on the property. Above it, carved into the limestone, were symbols I didn't recognize, not letters exactly, but spirals and zigzags and shapes that hurt to look at directly. I stood there for a long time, my heart doing something funny in my chest. The door was maybe 6 feet tall, narrow. There was no handle on the outside, just a keyhole. And there was a smell coming from behind it, cold, metallic, like wet stone and old copper. I thought about Marjorie's warning, I thought about calling her, but my phone had no signal and honestly I felt silly. It was just an old door. Probably led to a root cellar from the 1920s or a storm shelter, the previous owner's storage space. Maybe there was even something valuable inside, old coins, documents, who knew? I walked up to it. I put my hand on the wood. It was cold, unnaturally cold in that 100-degree heat. My palm stuck to it slightly, like touching frozen metal. Then I heard the whisper. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I knew. It sounded like wind through dry grass. Or sand blowing against stone, but rhythmic, intentional. It came from behind the door. And then this is the part that still makes me vomit if I think about it too hard. I heard my name. Daniel, not spoken, breathed. Like someone was right on the other side, their lips against the wood. I ran. I scrambled up the canyon wall so fast I tore my jeans, shredded my palms on the rocks. I didn't look back until I was at the trailer, gasping, my vision tunneling. The canyon looked empty, just rock and shadow. I locked the trailer doors. I sat at the kitchen table with the shotgun across my knees until sunset. Milo and Otis hid in the bedroom closet together, which they'd never done before. When dark came, I heard the wind pick up. It sounded like voices. I told myself it was just the wind in the creosote. But at midnight the knocking started. It came from beneath the trailer. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. Then scratching, long, slow scratches, like something with claws was dragging them along the underside of the floor. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back to the wall, holding the shotgun, counting the seconds between the sounds. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, they stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, expectant, like the air before a tornado. In the morning, I went outside to check. The ground beneath the trailer was undisturbed, just hard-packed caliche, no tracks. But on the porch step, someone had left a pile of stones. 5 stones stacked carefully into a cairn. I hadn't put them there. I would have remembered. I knocked them over with my boot and drove into Alpine. I needed Wi-Fi. I needed to research. I needed to not be alone. Journal entry May 17th. Okay. Deep breath. I'm at the coffee shop on 5th Street in Alpine. Ordered a breakfast taco with eggs and potato, trying to be normal, trying to think like a rational person. The door is just a door. Old miners probably built it. The knocking was probably a javelina or a coyote under the trailer. They do that right. They den under structures. The whisper was the wind. The cairn was, I don't know, kids. Though the nearest kids are 20 miles away, but I looked up Holly's Ketchum on the library Wi-Fi. He died in 2019, 89 years old. Natural causes, apparently. But I found an obituary in the Big Bend Sentinel. It mentioned he was a retired geologist and amateur historian who lived a private life on his family homestead. Family homestead, so he didn't buy the place, he inherited it. I searched the county records. The Ketchums have owned that land since 1887. Before that, nothing. The records just stop, like the land didn't exist before 1887. Which is impossible because this area was part of Mexico before 1848 and Spain before that. I'm going to go back. I have to. I own that place. I can't just abandon 40 acres because I got spooked by an old door and some animal noises. I'm a grown man. I have a mortgage. Well, I paid cash, but you know what I mean. But I'm not going near that canyon today. Maybe not ever. End journal entry. I spent the next week establishing a routine that felt like normalcy. I set up my desk by the window facing east so I could work with the morning sun. I got the generator running and installed a solar panel on the roof. I fixed the windmill. It needed a new gasket, which I ordered from a supply store in Fort Stockton. I planted a garden in the sandy soil near the well, tomatoes and peppers and zucchini, because everyone in Texas gardens, even in the desert. The cats settled in, sort of. Milo started venturing outside during the day, but only within a 10-foot radius of the porch. Otis refused to go near the canyon side of the trailer. If I carried him in that direction, he'd scratch my arms bloody to get away. I met my neighbors on the 3rd day. The Bakers, Jim and Dolers, ran cattle on the section to the east. Jim was a 3rd-generation rancher, sunburned and lined with hands like leather gloves. Dolers brought me a casserole, King Ranch chicken, she called it, which is apparently the state dish of Texas, and a warning. Don't wander too far south, she said, watching my eyes toward the canyon. Why? I asked, thinking of the door. She exchanged a look with Jim. Old mining shafts, unstable, and the wildlife, mountain lions, they den down there. Mountain lions, I repeated. And other things, Jim said quietly. Then he smiled too wide. But you'll be fine, just stay on the flat. Holly's never went down there, did you know? Not in 50 years. He did, not once, had a heart condition. Doctor said no strenuous hiking. Jim's smile didn't reach his eyes. He was a careful man, real careful. They left. I ate the casserole. It was delicious. Creamy and spicy and topped with corn chips, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been warning me about something specific. Something they were afraid to name. That night I woke up at 3:33 a.m. again, not because of noise, but because of silence. The crickets had stopped, the wind had stopped, the trailer was perfectly, oppressively quiet, and then I heard the singing. It came from the canyon, a high, reedy sound like a flute made of bone, playing a melody that had no scale I recognized. It rose and fell, looping back on itself. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I got out of bed. I walked to the sliding glass door. The moon was full, turning the desert silver, and I could see the mouth of the canyon clearly. There was a light down there, a blue-white glow, pulsing gently in time with the music. I unlocked the door. I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled like rain and ozone and something sweet like honeysuckle. The music pulled at me. I took a step toward the canyon, then another. My bare feet on the caliche didn't hurt. Nothing hurt. I felt like I was floating. I was halfway there when Milo tackled my leg. He came out of nowhere, claws out, yowling like I'd never heard. He wrapped himself around my ankle and bit down hard. The pain snapped me back like a rubber band. I stumbled, fell. Scraped my elbow on a rock. The music stopped instantly. The light winked out. And from the canyon, no, from the earth itself, came a sound like grinding stone, like tectonic plates shifting, like something very old and very angry being denied a meal. I grabbed Milo and ran back to the trailer. I locked the door. I put furniture against it, the couch, the bookshelf, the heavy oak desk I'd brought from Ohio. I sat with my back to the barricade, holding my cat, who was trembling so hard his teeth chattered, until dawn. When the sun rose, I found footprints in the dust outside my door. Not boots, not shoes. They were narrow, long, with too many toes, 6 or 7 on each foot, and they walked in a circle around the trailer before leading off toward the canyon. My footprints were there too, walking straight toward the canyon, stopping where I'd fallen, but I had been barefoot. These other prints were deep, pressed into the hard caliche as if whatever made them weighed hundreds of pounds. I photographed everything. I measured the prints with a tape measure, 14 inches long, 6 inches wide at the ball. I emailed the photos to a friend in Columbus who was into cryptozoology as a joke. He didn't think it was funny. He told me to leave. He told me those looked like fairy tracks from old folklore, but scaled up to a size that shouldn't exist. I didn't leave. I think now that I couldn't. Something had hooked into me like a fish hook in my mind. I kept telling myself it was the money. I'd invested everything in this place. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that the isolation was getting to me, that I needed to tough it out. But I started following rules without realizing I was following them. I stopped going outside after dark, period. If I needed to use the bathroom and it was after sunset, I used a bucket rather than walk to the outhouse. I stopped looking directly at the canyon mouth when the sun was setting. I kept it in my peripheral vision only. I started leaving offerings on the porch, bowls of milk, plates of cornbread. Old superstitions I'd never learned but somehow knew, and I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up at 3:33 a.m. every single night without fail, my heart pounding, my ears straining for the sound of scratching under the floor. Text message exchange, May 24th, Sarah, sister, hey, how's the desert treating you? Mom says you haven't called me, sorry, spotty service, it's an adjustment. Sarah, you sound weird, everything okay? Me, fine, just tired. Getting the place set up. Sarah, those pictures you sent of the canyon were pretty. You hiking a lot? Me, no, not going in there. Sarah, why not? Me, it's dangerous, unstable. Sarah, you're in the middle of nowhere. What else are you going to do? Me, working, gardening, staying busy. Sarah, you're being weird. Should I come visit? Me, no. Sarah, me, sorry, just not a good time, maybe in a few months. Sarah, you're scaring me. Me, don't be scared, just if I send you something, a package, keep it safe, don't open it. Sarah, what? Me, nothing, ignore me, I'm fine. In text exchange, the breaking point came in June. The heat had climbed to 110 degrees during the day, dropping to only 90 at night. The cicadas screamed constantly. I'd taken to sleeping during the day and working at night, because the night was when the whispers came, and I was too afraid to sleep through them. I started researching. The Brewster County Library in Alpine had microfiche records going back to the 1800s. I spent 3 days there, hunched over the glowing screen, scrolling through yellowed newspaper pages. I found the first mention in the Alpine avalanche. Dated October 14, 1887. Mysterious disappearance in South County. Mr. Josiah Ketchum recently arrived from Philadelphia to establish a cattle operation, reports the loss of 3 hands who ventured into a canyon on his property to seek water. The men Pedro Alvarez, Michael O'Donnell, and a colored man known only as Jeremiah entered the defile known locally as Yellow Horse Canyon at noon on Tuesday last and have not been seen since. Search parties found their horses tethered at the canyon mouth, along with their boots and clothing folded neatly. No other trace has been discovered. Mr. Ketchum has offered a reward of $50 for information leading to their recovery. Editor's note. Local Apache guides refuse to enter the canyon, claiming it is a thin place where the skin of the world is worn through. Superstitious nonsense, surely, but worth noting. I felt cold despite the heat. Jeremiah, the name meant something. Though I didn't know what yet, I kept scrolling. May 3, 1902. A brief item about Josiah Ketchum's daughter, Eliza, age 16, found wandering the desert naked, speaking no English, only gibberish and howling. She claimed she'd been down below for 3 days, though she was only missing for 1 night. She died 2 weeks later in the Alpine Asylum. The article mentioned she kept trying to dig through the floor of her cell with her bare hands. August 12. 1947, Holly's Ketchum's father, William, filed a police report about vandals who had excavated near the canyon. No suspects were found. The sheriff's note mentioned strange symbols carved into the rock. March 2, 1963. A hiker from Dallas reported seeing lights and music coming from Yellow Horse Canyon. He was found the next day on Highway 118, dehydrated and incoherent, claiming he'd been lost for 3 weeks, though he'd only been missing overnight. He refused to return to retrieve his vehicle. It's still out there somewhere, rusting in the desert. And then, October 31, 1987, 30 years to the day from the first article. Local historian claims ancient origins for Brewster County structure. Holly's Ketchum, 57, amateur archaeologist and owner of Yellow Horse Ranch, has published a monograph claiming that the anomalous stone structure on his property predates human habitation in North America by several thousand years. Ketchum alleges that the structure, which he describes only as a portal, was constructed by non-human entities and represents evidence of pre-Columbian contact with interstitial beings. The University of Texas has declined to comment. Dr. Robert Vance, chair of the anthropology department, called Ketchum's claims laughable pseudoscience and borderline occultism. Ketchum maintains that the site is active and dangerous. He has petitioned the county to condemn the property. The petition was denied. I printed the articles. My hands were shaking so badly the librarian, a young woman with glasses and a University of Texas sweatshirt, asked if I was all right. "Do you know anything about Holly's Ketchum?" I asked her. She looked around, then leaned in. "He used to come in here every Tuesday. He'd read the old newspapers, just like you. He told me once. He told me he was keeping something locked up, something that needed to be fed." "Fed what?" "Attention," she whispered, "or blood." "He wasn't specific. He died 2 years ago. Heart attack, they said, but my uncle's a paramedic and he said there was no heart attack." Said Holly's looked like he'd been scared to death. Eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a scream. "And they found him in his truck, parked at the canyon mouth, engine running, doors locked from the inside." She handed me a book. It was old, leather-bound, the title stamped in gold, "The Hollow Places." A survey of anomalous geography in the Trans-Pecos region. It was in the rare books section. Holly's donated it before he died. There's a chapter about your property, page 143. I took the book. I shouldn't have. I should have burned it. I sat in my truck in the library parking lot and read chapter 7, Yellow Horse Canyon and the Ketchum Door. The author, one Dr. Elias Vance, no relation to the UT professor, apparently, wrote that the canyon was known to the local Mescalero Apache as Goya, which roughly translates to the place where the earth breathes. They believed it was a naturally occurring, thin spot between dimensions or worlds, or states of being. The text was unclear. The door, he claimed, was not a door at all, but a plug, a cork, something installed thousands of years ago by entities unknown to keep something on the other side from coming through. The door had to be maintained, Vance wrote. It required a guardian, someone to live on the land, to pay attention to it, to feed it with their presence. The Ketchum family had been the guardians for 5 generations, whether they knew it or not. Holly's had known. He tried to break the cycle by dying without heirs, by letting the property go to the state, but the thing on the other side was patient. It could wait, and when I bought the land, when I signed the deed, I'd become the new guardian. The book mentioned rules: don't go through the door, don't invite it in, don't listen to the music, and never, under any circumstances, look at it directly if you see it outside. I threw the book in the back seat and drove home too fast, my tires kicking up dust devils. I was going to pack. I was going to leave. I'd abandon the trailer, the land, the 40 acres. I'd sleep in my truck if I had to. But when I pulled up to the property, there was a car parked next to mine, a dusty Toyota Camry with Ohio plates. My sister Sarah stepped out of the driver's side, waving, smiling. "Surprise," she yelled. "I decided you shouldn't be alone out here." And from the canyon, the music started. Voice memo transcript, June 15th, 11:47 p.m. "Oh God. Oh God, oh God, oh God, it's in the trailer, it's inside. I told Sarah to run. I told her to get in her car and drive and not stop until she hit Alpine. She wouldn't listen. She wanted to see the canyon. She wanted to see the door. She said I was acting crazy, that I needed help, that this was an intervention. We argued. She walked toward the canyon. I tackled her. We fought. I dragged her back to the trailer, screaming. She called me insane. She called me abusive. And then the power went out. The whole grid, but the lights came on in the canyon. Blue lights, white lights, and the music. Sarah heard it. She stopped screaming. She went quiet. She walked to the door. I grabbed her arm and she turned around and her eyes were wrong. Her pupils were shaped like stars. She said, "It's been so long since we had visitors. Please, let us in." But it wasn't her voice, it was voices, hundreds of them harmonizing. I pushed her away. I locked the door. She's pounding on it now. The frame is splintering. She's strong. She's so strong. It's 3:33 a.m. If someone finds this, don't come here. Burn the deed, burn the land, salt the earth. Sound of wood cracking. It's coming through. End transcript. I need to explain what happened next. I need to make you understand why I did what I did. But writing it makes my hands shake so badly I have to stop every few minutes to dry my palms on my jeans. Sarah was Sarah anymore, not entirely. When I pushed her away from the door, she moved wrong, too fluid, too fast. Like a puppet with the strings cut and rewired. Her face was still hers, but the expression behind it was ancient, hungry. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the shotgun. I didn't shoot her. God, I hope you believe that. I shot the lock off the back bedroom window and shoved her through it. She landed in the creosote bushes and rolled, boneless, like a bag of water. Then she stood up, her head tilting at an angle that would break a human neck. And she smiled at me with too many teeth. "Guardian," she said in that chorus of voices, "you cannot leave. The door is opening. It has been opening since the first stone was placed. You are the mortar now. You are the seal." I slammed the window shut. I dragged the mattress off the bed and wedged it against the glass. I could hear her circling the trailer, scratching at the aluminum siding, singing that bone flute song. I called 911. The dispatcher said the nearest sheriff was an hour away and there was a storm rolling in and the roads might flood. She told me to stay inside, lock the doors, wait for help. Help never came. At 4:00 a.m. the storm hit. Not a normal Texas thunderstorm, this was biblical. Hail the size of golf balls hammered the metal roof, deafening. Lightning struck so close the trailer shook. The wind screamed like a woman in labor, tearing at the seams of the structure. And in the flashes of lightning I saw them, shapes moving around the trailer, tall, thin, with limbs that bent backward. They were dancing, dancing to the music. Sarah appeared at the sliding glass door. She looked normal again, crying, scared. "Dan," she said, her voice hers again. "Dan, please let me in. It's so cold out here. Something's wrong with me. I can feel them inside my head. Please, I'm your sister." I almost did it. I reached for the lock, but then I saw her feet. They were backwards, the heels were facing forward. "No," I said. Her face fell, then it split. Not literally, but her expression became something from a nightmare, a rictus of rage and delight. "Then we take you both," she said. And her fist punched through the glass. I ran. I grabbed my keys, my phone, the shotgun. I didn't think about the cats. I'm sorry, I didn't think about them. I burst out the front door and ran for my truck. The shapes turned toward me. I saw them clearly for the first time in the strobe light of the lightning. They were tall, 7 or 8 feet, with skin that looked like polished obsidian, reflecting the storm. They had too many joints in their arms, and their faces, God. Their faces were wrong, flat, featureless except for mouths that ran ear to ear, filled with needle teeth. One of them grabbed my shoulder. Its touch burned like dry ice. I fired the shotgun blind, the recoil knocking me down. It screamed, a sound like static and breaking glass, and let go. I got in the truck. The engine turned over. Sarah jumped onto the hood, her fingers digging into the metal like it was butter. She stared at me through the windshield. Her eyes black pits. "You own the land," she hissed, audible even over the storm. "You are bound, you cannot run." I floored it. The truck jerked forward, throwing her off. I felt the thump as the tires went over something soft. I didn't look back. I drove through the gate onto the county road, the hail cracking my windshield, the lightning showing me the way. In the rearview mirror I saw the canyon. The door was open. Light was pouring out of it, white and cold. And things were crawling out, hundreds of them, spilling onto the desert floor like ants from a nest. I drove until the gas tank was empty, coasting into a gas station in Marathon at dawn. I sat in the cab, shaking. Until the attendant called the cops. They found Sarah's body the next day. She was in the trailer in the closet. She'd been dead for 3 days, according to the coroner, before I arrived, before the argument. The Sarah who came to visit me was never Sarah. It was something wearing her skin. They arrested me at first, suspicion of murder, but the autopsy showed no trauma, no cause of death, just stopped. And my sister's credit card records showed she never left Ohio. She'd been found dead in her apartment in Columbus the same day she appeared at my ranch, the same day. The thing that wore her face had walked across dimensions or through time. Or however it works, the charges were dropped, lack of evidence, insufficient proof. The Brewster County Sheriff's Department doesn't have a file on what happened at Yellow Horse Canyon. When I called to ask about the investigation, the sheriff told me there was no record of any incident at that address, ever, but I have the Polaroid, I have the voice memos, I have the journal, and I have the dreams. Every night at 3:33 a.m. I wake up, and in the corner of my hotel room, or my new apartment, or wherever I am, there's a shadow, watching, waiting, because I think I understand now. The door isn't just in the canyon, the door is in me. I'm the guardian, whether I want to be or not. I carry the land with me. And eventually, when I get tired enough, when I let my guard down, I'll open the door again. I'll let them in. Reddit post our paranormal 2 days ago. Something followed me from Terlingua TX. I need help. I know how this sounds. I know. But please, if anyone has experience with southwestern land entities, with thin places, with guardian curses, I need to talk to you. I can't sleep. I see them in every shadow. I hear the music in white noise. I tried to go back. I thought if I burned the trailer, if I destroyed the door, it would end. I drove back last week. The land is gone, not sold, gone. The county says the parcel number I have doesn't exist. The canyon isn't on any map. Marjorie Pickett, the realtor. She died in 1987. Same day Holly's Ketchum's father filed that police report. But I have the deed. I have it right here. It's yellow and old, and it says I own 40 acres in Brewster County. It says I'm the guardian. And last night, someone knocked on my hotel door. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. When I looked through the peephole, it was me, standing in the hallway, smiling with too many teeth. He said, "You can't sell what you don't own, but you can give it away. You just have to find someone else to sign. I'm going to do it. I'm sorry, I'm going to post the listing. 40 acres, cheap price, beautiful views, remote, private canyon access. Don't buy it, please don't buy it. But if you're reading this, if you're desperate for land and sky and silence, you'll ignore me. You'll think I'm crazy. You'll drive down that county road and you'll see the stars and you'll fall in love. And then you'll hear the knocking. And then you'll meet me at the door." Update, I can hear scratching under the floor now. It's 3:33 a.m. The Wi-Fi is cutting out. If you're near Alpine, if you know someone who can perform a cleansing, who knows the old Apache songs, please, end of document. I'm adding this addendum from a library computer in Tucson. I managed to check out of the hotel before it found me again. I've been driving east for 2 days, trying to put distance between me and Texas. But the miles don't help. The thing is, I looked at the deed again, really looked at it in the light of a gas station outside El Paso. There's fine print, there's always fine print. At the bottom, in fading ink, it says, "The bearer agrees to maintain the seal in perpetuity or until a suitable replacement is found." I found a replacement. I'm sorry. His name is Michael Chen. He's from Seattle. He's buying the land next week. He emailed me this morning. Excited about the view, about the windmill, about the cute little door in the canyon he saw in the photos I sent. I tried to warn him. I did. I told him not to go near the canyon. He laughed and said he was an urban explorer, that he loved finding weird old structures. He's there now. I can feel him there, standing in front of the door, wondering why it's cold, why he can hear music, why his dog won't stop barking, and I can breathe easier. The scratching has stopped. The knocking has stopped. The shadow in the corner is gone, but I know it's temporary. Michael won't last. They never last. And when he breaks, when he runs, the land will call me back, or it will call you, if you're reading this. If you've read this far, you're marked now. You know about the door, you know about Yellow Horse Canyon, and knowing is enough. Knowing is the first step toward owning. Check your windows, check your doors. And if you ever find yourself driving through West Texas and you see a for sale sign by a rusted iron gate and the price is too good to be true, keep driving. Don't look in the rearview mirror, and whatever you do, don't get out of the car if you hear your name whispered on the wind. I'm going back now. The land is calling. I can hear it in my blood, in my bones, a sound like stone grinding against stone. I'm going to be a good guardian. I'm going to sit on the porch with my shotgun and wait for the next one. Maybe this time I'll be stronger. Maybe this time I'll keep the door closed. Or maybe I'll finally open it and see what's been waiting so long to come home. The stars are bright tonight, the cicadas are screaming, and somewhere in Brewster County a door is opening. Don't let it be yours. I bought 40 acres outside Marfa, Texas for $12,000. Now I know why it was so cheap. I'm writing this because I need people to know what happened out there. I need someone to believe me, even if you think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. But if you're looking at cheap land in West Texas, if you see a deal that seems too good to be true, please read this first. Please, my name is Jake Morrison. I'm 34, work in tech, and up until 6 months ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was getting laid off from my software job in Austin. I was wrong, so incredibly wrong. It started in March 2026. I'd been working remote since COVID and my landlord jacked my rent up to $2,800 for a one-bedroom apartment. Austin was pricing out everyone who wasn't making six figures, and my startup job wasn't exactly stable. I'd been scrolling through those cheap land Facebook groups. You know, the ones where people talk about buying acreage in rural areas and living off-grid. It seemed romantic. Stupid, I know, but romantic. That's when I found the listing. 40 acres outside Marfa, Texas. Marfa, you might know it as that artsy town where rich people from California go to look at mysterious lights in the desert and pay $400 a night to sleep in renovated Airstream trailers. The listing was barebones, 40 acres, mineral rights included. Water well on property, $12,000 firm, serious inquiries only, $12,000 for 40 acres in Texas with a water well. I'd looked at land prices across the state. This should have been worth at least $80,000. Maybe more with those mineral rights. I called the number immediately. The seller was a woman named Patricia Hernandez. She sounded tired, like she'd been expecting my call but dreading it, when I asked why the price was so low. She paused for a long time. Family needs to sell quickly, she finally said. Property's been in our family since 1923. It's time to let it go. I asked about utilities, access roads, any issues with the land. She said there was an old farmhouse on the property that needed work and a dirt road that connected to FM 2810. The well water was good. No HOA, no restrictions. Perfect for someone wanting to get away from it all. Have you been out to see the property yourself? I asked. Another long pause. Not in recent years. My grandfather owned it. We're handling the sale from San Antonio. Something felt off about her tone, but $12,000 for 40 acres in Texas. I'd spent more than that on my car. I told her I'd drive out that weekend to look at it. Mr. Morrison, she said, and her voice changed, became sharper. If you do go out there, don't stay after dark. The road can be difficult to navigate at night. I laughed. Ma'am, I grew up in rural Oklahoma. I know country roads. This isn't about the road, she said quietly, then hung up. I should have paid attention to that. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I spent the next 3 days researching Marfa, looking at satellite images of the property on Google Earth, and planning my new off-grid life. The house looked small but intact from the aerial view. The land was flat desert with some scrub brush, bordered by an old fence line. Perfect. Friday afternoon, I loaded my Honda Civic with camping gear and drove west from Austin. If you've never driven across Texas, you can't understand the scale. It's 5.5 hours from Austin to Marfa. And for the last 3 hours, you see maybe 2 other cars. The landscape changes from hill country green to absolute desert brown. The sky gets bigger until you feel like an ant under a blue dome. I stopped in Fort Stockton for gas and a burger at a Dairy Queen. The girl behind the counter was probably 17, with a thick West Texas accent that made every word sound like honey poured over gravel. You heading to Marfa? She asked. Noticing my Austin license plates. Yeah, looking at some land out that way. She gave me a look I couldn't read. You be careful out there. Lots of weird stuff happens around those parts. My cousin works dispatch for Presidio County Sheriff's Office. Says they get calls all the time about strange lights, missing hikers. Desert ain't like the city. Things happen out there that don't happen anywhere else. I paid for my food and thanked her, but didn't think much of it. Every rural area has its ghost stories. Oklahoma had them too. The drive from Fort Stockton to Marfa takes you through some of the most desolate country in America. No billboards. No strip malls, just scrub brush, distant mountains, and abandoned ranch houses with their roofs caved in. The FM roads branch off the main highway like capillaries, leading to nowhere you can see. I found FM 2810 just as the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. The property was supposed to be 12 miles down this road. My phone lost signal about 3 miles in. The road was rough caliche, basically crushed limestone and dirt, but my little Civic handled it okay if I kept the speed down. At mile marker 8, I saw the fence line Patricia had described. Old cedar posts connected by 5 strands of barbed wire. Most of it sagging or broken. The gate was there too, a metal tube gate with a rusty chain and padlock. Patricia had mailed me the key. I got out to unlock the gate, and that's when I first noticed the silence. Complete silence, no wind, no insects. No birds. In Oklahoma, there was always something making noise, cicadas, meadowlarks, cows lowing in the distance. Here nothing, just my breathing and the faint tick of my car's engine cooling down. The silence felt wrong, but I shook it off. Different ecosystem, different sounds, or lack of sounds. The driveway was 2 tire ruts through dead grass, leading about a quarter mile to a small farmhouse. Single-story white siding that had faded to gray, corrugated metal roof. The front porch sagged a little, and a few of the windows were boarded up, but the structure looked solid. Behind the house was a windmill, one of those old air motor water pumps you see all over rural Texas. It wasn't spinning. Despite a constant breeze, I could see moving the scrub brush. The blades looked intact, so I figured the mechanism was probably seized up from lack of maintenance. I parked beside the house and got out. The silence followed me. I walked around the property as the sun continued to sink. 40 acres isn't huge, but it felt enormous out there, fenced on 3 sides, with the 4th side opening to thousands of acres of federal desert land stretching toward the Chinati Mountains. The house key was under a loose board on the front porch, exactly where Patricia said it would be. The door opened with a groan of old hinges. Inside, the house was bigger than it looked from outside. Front room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The furniture was still there, old stuff from the 1940s and 50s, covered in dust sheets. It smelled like dust and old wood and something else I couldn't identify, something musty and organic. In the kitchen, I found a notebook on the counter. The pages were yellowed and the ink was faded, but I could make out most of it. It was a record of daily activities, written in an old man's careful handwriting. March 15, 1987, fixed fence on north side. Saw lights again last night, 3 of them moving in formation toward the mountains. Miguel says his grandfather called them Los Vigilantes, the Watchers. March 22, 1987, well pump acting up, water tastes metallic, need to check the casing. April 3, 1987, something killed 2 of my goats, no tracks, no blood. Just found them in the morning lying peaceful like in the pasture, eyes open but clouded over, not like coyote kill at all. April 8, 1987, can't sleep, hearing scratching in the walls at night, probably just rats but sounds too organized. Like something trying to communicate. April 15, 1987, Miguel won't come out here anymore, says the land is mal bendito, cursed, superstitious nonsense, but I'm starting to wonder myself. The silence is getting worse, used to hear coyotes, owls. Night birds, now just quiet, even the wind sounds different. The last entry was dated April 22, 1987. Something is in the house with me, I can feel it watching. If anyone finds this, don't stay after dark, the land remembers. It remembers what happened here before. I flipped through the rest of the notebook, but the pages were blank. Standing there in that dusty kitchen, reading about lights and dead goats and something in the walls. I should have gotten back in my car and driven straight back to Austin. But the sun was almost down, I was tired from the drive, and honestly, the ghost stories felt like local color. Every old house in rural America has a journal full of weird observations from some previous owner. It goes with the territory. I brought my camping gear inside and set up my sleeping bag in the front room. The house had electricity, an old panel box with ceramic fuses, but when I flipped the main breaker, nothing happened. Either the power was disconnected or the wiring was shot. No matter. I had a battery lantern and my phone still had some charge. Even without signal, I heated up a can of chili on my camp stove and sat on the front porch to eat, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky turned orange, then red, then deep purple. Stars started appearing. More stars than I'd ever seen in my life. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like spilled milk. Beautiful, peaceful, worth every penny of $12,000. Around 9 o'clock, I heard the first sound since arriving, a low humming. Almost like electrical wires, but deeper. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood up from my porch chair and walked out into the yard, trying to locate the source. The humming stopped. I waited, listening. But the silence was back, complete and total silence. No insects, no wind, no distant highway noise. Nothing. I convinced myself it was probably power lines. There had to be electrical infrastructure out here somewhere. even if it wasn't connected to the house. High voltage lines can make all kinds of noises, especially when the weather changes. Back inside, I settled into my sleeping bag and tried to read on my Kindle for a while. The battery was getting low. So I turned it off and just lay there in the darkness, listening to my own breathing. That's when I heard the scratching, soft at first, like fingernails on wood. It was coming from inside the walls, just like the old man had written about. I sat up and turned on my lantern. The scratching stopped immediately. I waited, light in hand, but nothing. Mice, I told myself, or rats. Old houses always have rodents. The sound hadn't been random, though. It had rhythm to it. Almost like Morse code, long scratches, short scratches, pauses. After about 10 minutes, I turned the light off and lay back down. The scratching started again immediately. This time I didn't turn on the light, I just listened, trying to determine where in the walls it was coming from. It seemed to move around the room, starting at the north wall, then the east wall, then the south. Always the same rhythm, always stopping the moment I made any noise or turned on a light. I must have fallen asleep around midnight because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows. My first thought was relief, I'd made it through the night. My second thought was embarrassment. Ghost stories and scratching mice had me spooked like a child afraid of the boogeyman. Saturday morning was beautiful. The desert stretched out forever under a blue sky, and I could see why people fell in love with West Texas. I spent the day exploring the property, checking the fence lines, looking at the old barn behind the house. The barn was in rough shape, half the roof was gone, and most of the siding had blown away, but the foundation was solid concrete. The well pump was exactly what I'd expected, an old air motor windmill that hadn't been maintained in decades. The blades were locked up with rust, but the well itself seemed fine. I dropped a rock down the casing and heard it splash after about 3 seconds, plenty of water. I walked the entire 40 acres that afternoon, getting a feel for the land. It was good ground, flat enough to build on, high enough to avoid flooding. With decent soil under the scrub brush, I could picture a small solar array, maybe a workshop, definitely a vegetable garden if I could get water to it. The only thing that bothered me was the silence, even during the day. There were no sounds except what I made myself. No birds, no insects, no small animals rustling in the brush. It was like the land was holding its breath. Around 5 o'clock. I drove into Marfa to grab dinner and maybe find someone who knew about the property. Marfa is a weird little town, famous for mysterious lights that appear in the desert, and for being a destination for artists and rich people who want to experience authentic West Texas while staying in boutique hotels that cost more per night than most people make in a week. I ate at a place called Cochineal, where my burger cost $18 and came with microgreens. The waitress was friendly, clearly not a local, probably from Austin or California, working in Marfa for the experience. "You're staying out of town?" she asked, noticing my camping clothes. Looking at some land about 12 miles down FM 2810, her friendly expression changed. "Oh, that property, you know it." She glanced around the restaurant, then leaned closer. "My boyfriend works for the county road department. He says they don't maintain that section of 2810 anymore. Haven't for years, too many weird incidents." "What kind of incidents?" "People calling in reports of lights, sounds, missing time. Usually tourists who got lost looking for the Marfa lights and ended up out that way instead. County stopped responding to calls from that area unless it's a genuine emergency. Missing time, you know. People who go out there at 7 p.m. and suddenly it's 3 in the morning and they can't remember what happened. Probably just people getting disoriented in the desert, but," she shrugged. "It's happened enough that the sheriff's department has a policy about it now." I thanked her and paid my check, but her words stuck with me as I drove back to the property. Missing time. That sounded like the kind of nonsense you hear around any tourist trap with a supernatural reputation. Every small town in America has ghost stories designed to bring in visitors, but as I turned onto FM 2810 and my phone lost signal again, I found myself checking the time, 7:15 p.m. I made a mental note to keep track. The sun was setting as I reached the property gate. This time, unlocking it and driving through felt different, heavier somehow, like the air itself was thicker. I parked beside the house and checked my watch again. 7:31 p.m., 16 minutes, which was about right for the drive. I spent the evening making notes about what I'd need to do to make the house livable. New electrical wiring. Probably a new roof within a few years, definitely new plumbing. But the bones were good, and at $12,000 I could afford to put work into it. Around 10 o'clock, I was sitting on the front porch when I saw my first light. It started as a faint glow on the horizon, maybe 2 miles away toward the mountains. At first I thought it might be a car or truck, but it wasn't moving along any kind of road. It was just hovering about 20 feet off the ground. Pulsing slowly brighter and dimmer, I watched it for maybe 10 minutes. The light seemed to move closer, then farther away, but never in a straight line, more like it was circling something I couldn't see. Then it went out, just vanished. Like someone had flipped a switch. I sat there staring at the spot where it had been, wondering if I'd actually seen anything or if my eyes had been playing tricks. The desert at night can mess with your perception. Distant stars can look like moving lights, especially when you're tired, but then I saw another one. This light was closer, maybe half a mile away, and definitely not a star. It was moving in a deliberate pattern up and down, side to side. Like someone signaling with a flashlight, but the light was too bright and too steady to be a flashlight, more like a spotlight but somehow softer. I stood up from my chair and walked out into the yard, trying to get a better look. The light stopped moving immediately. For several seconds it just hung there in the darkness, and I had the distinct feeling that whatever was behind that light was looking back at me. Then it started moving toward me. I don't mind admitting I was scared. This wasn't the Marfa lights, which appear much farther south and are generally considered harmless tourist attractions. This was something else. Something that seemed aware of my presence and was approaching my location. When the light got to within maybe a quarter mile, I could hear it. A low humming sound, just like what I'd heard the night before. The sound seemed to vibrate through the ground up into my bones. I backed toward the house, never taking my eyes off the approaching light. It kept coming until it was right at the fence line, maybe 100 yards away. Close enough that I could see it wasn't just a simple light, there was something behind it, a dark shape that blocked out the stars. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. The humming got louder, and I started to feel dizzy, like I might pass out. That's when I ran inside and slammed the door behind me. The humming continued for another few minutes, then stopped. I waited by the window, trying to see if the light was still there. But I couldn't see anything from inside the house. Eventually, I worked up the courage to peek out the front window. Nothing. The yard was empty, lit only by starlight. I checked my watch, 11:47 p.m. I'd been outside for almost 2 hours. But it had only felt like 20 minutes. This time I paid attention. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear the scratching in the walls again. Always the same rhythm, always stopping when I turned on the light. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and just sat in my chair with the lantern on, reading the old man's journal again. The land remembers, he'd written. It remembers what happened here before, what had happened here before. The property records would be at the county courthouse in Marfa. If I was serious about buying this land, and after 2 nights I was having serious doubts, I should probably research its history. Sunday morning. I packed up my gear and drove back to Austin. I needed time to think, and I needed an internet connection to do some research. That night, in my overpriced apartment with traffic noise and neighbor sounds and all the normal chaos of city life, I sat down with my laptop and started digging into Presidio County records. The 40 acres had been owned by Patricia Hernandez's family since 1923, just like she'd said before that. It had been part of a larger ranch owned by a family named Crawford. The Crawfords had lost the property during the Great Depression, and it had been subdivided and sold off in pieces. But it was the older records that got interesting. In 1891, the land had been the site of a small settlement called Esperanza. Not really a town, just a collection of maybe 20 families who were trying to ranch cattle and farm in the desert. They'd chosen the spot because of the reliable water well and because it was roughly halfway between Marfa and Presidio. According to an article in the Marfa New Era from 1892, Esperanza had been abandoned suddenly in the winter of 1891. The reporter had ridden out to investigate after rumors that the entire settlement had disappeared overnight. He found empty houses with meals still on the tables, clothes still hanging on wash lines, cattle and horses wandering loose in the desert. But no people, all 23 families, about 80 people total, were just gone. The article quoted the Presidio County Sheriff. It appears the residents of Esperanza departed their settlement in haste, but left behind all their possessions and livestock. We have found no evidence of violence or struggle. It is as if they simply vanished into the desert. The settlement was never reoccupied. The houses were eventually torn down or abandoned to the elements. The land changed hands several times over the next 30 years before the Hernandez family bought it. But here's the thing that really caught my attention. The records from 1923 to 1987 showed a pattern. Every family who tried to live on that land left within 2 years, usually much sooner. 1923-1925, Hernandez family left due to health concerns. 1925-1928, sold to a rancher named McClellan. Left due to financial difficulties. 1928-1941, owned by a farming company, abandoned during the Dust Bowl. 1941-1943, purchased by a family named Santos, left due to family emergency. 1943-1961, purchased by the state, used as a research station. Closed due to budget cuts. 1961-1987, back to the Hernandez family, the old man whose journal I'd found. 1987-2026, owned by the Hernandez family but unoccupied. 40 years of no one living on the land, but they'd kept paying taxes on it. Kept the deed current. Why, if the land was worthless, why not just let it go for back taxes? I called Patricia Hernandez. Mr. Morrison, have you made a decision about the property? I have some questions first. Can you tell me why your family owned the land for 40 years but never lived on it? A long pause. My grandfather lived there until he passed away in 1987, and then we decided it would be better as an investment property. Ms. Hernandez, I read some old newspaper articles about that area. There was a settlement called Esperanza that disappeared in 1891. Did your grandfather ever mention that? Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Morrison. Are you still interested in purchasing the property or not? I'm interested, but I need to know what I'm buying. Your grandfather's journal mentioned lights, strange sounds, dead animals. The land has a history of people leaving quickly. I need to know why. This time the pause was so long I thought she'd hung up. My grandfather was very superstitious, she finally said. He believed in old stories, Mexican folklore, Native American legends. The kind of thing that appeals to certain people but has no basis in reality. What kind of legends? Mr. Morrison, you seem like a practical person. You work in technology. Surely you don't believe in ghost stories. I believe in disclosure. If there's something about this property that affects its value, I have a right to know. I heard her sigh. There are stories that the land was sacred to the Apache, that it was used for certain rituals when the Spanish came. Then the Mexican settlers, then the Americans, each group reported strange experiences. The Esperanza settlement wasn't the first group to leave suddenly. What kind of experiences? Lights in the desert, sounds at night. People reported feeling watched, having strange dreams. Some claimed to see apparitions. But Mr. Morrison, these are just stories, folklore, the kind of thing that builds up around any isolated area. Your grandfather believed the stories. My grandfather was an old man who lived alone in the desert for 20 years. Isolation can affect a person's judgment. Then why are you selling the land so cheaply? The longest pause yet. Because we want it gone from our family. Because it's been nothing but a burden for 40 years. Because every time we try to develop it or rent it or do anything productive with it, something goes wrong. Her voice was rising now, frustrated. Because I've spent my entire adult life paying taxes on land we can't use and trying to forget it exists. What goes wrong when you try to develop it? Workers quit, equipment breaks down, contractors refuse to come back. Last year we hired a company to clear some of the brush and install a fence. They worked for 3 days, then the foreman called and said they couldn't complete the job, wouldn't explain why, just returned our deposit and drove away. Ms. Hernandez. What do you think is really out there? I think it's 40 acres of desert that brings out the worst in people's imaginations. I think it's isolated and quiet and strange in the way all remote places are strange. And I think for $12,000 you're getting a fantastic deal on good Texas land. And if I experience the same problems other people have experienced, then you'll understand why we're selling it so cheaply. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and tried to decide what to do. On one hand, I had a great deal on decent land in a beautiful area. On the other hand, I had a documented history of people leaving the property quickly. Strange experiences that multiple witnesses had reported, and a seller who clearly wanted nothing more to do with the place. The rational decision was to walk away, find different land, maybe spend a little more money. Definitely get something without a mysterious history, but $12,000 for 40 acres with water rights, and I'd already spent 2 nights out there. I'd seen some lights and heard some scratching, but nothing that had actually hurt me. Nothing that couldn't have a natural explanation. Besides, I was tired of Austin, tired of rent increases and traffic and competing with Californians for housing. I wanted space, quiet, a place to build something of my own. I called Patricia back and told her I'd take it. The closing was scheduled for the following Friday. All cash deal, no inspection, no contingencies. Patricia seemed eager to get it done quickly, and I was eager to start my new life. Thursday night. I loaded up my Honda with more gear, tools, a generator, basic supplies, and drove back out to Marfa. I wanted to spend one more night on the property before it was officially mine, just to be absolutely sure I was making the right decision. This time I knew what to expect: the silence, the scratching in the walls, maybe some lights in the distance. I'd survived it twice before. What I didn't expect was to find that the front door of the house was standing wide open. I'd locked it when I left on Sunday, I was certain of that, but as I pulled up to the house Thursday evening, the door was open and darkness was spilling out onto the front porch. I sat in my car for several minutes, trying to decide what to do. Maybe Patricia had come out to check on something. Maybe the county had sent someone to verify the property boundaries before the sale. Maybe the wind had blown it open, although I distinctly remembered turning the deadbolt, which couldn't be opened by wind. Eventually I worked up the courage to go look. I took a flashlight from my car and approached the house slowly. The front room was exactly as I'd left it. No signs of disturbance, no evidence anyone had been inside. The dust on the floor showed only my own footprints from the weekend, but the house felt different, heavier, like the air itself was thicker and harder to breathe. I checked the door frame carefully. The lock wasn't broken. The deadbolt was turned to the unlocked position, as if someone had unlocked it from the inside, but the only key was in my pocket and no one else had access, unless someone was already inside when I'd locked up on Sunday. That thought sent a chill down my spine. I did a thorough search of the house, all 3 rooms, every closet, even under the bed in the back bedroom. Nothing, no signs anyone had been there. I checked the windows, all still locked from the inside, with no broken glass or damaged screens. Somehow that door had unlocked itself from the inside. I should have left right then. Should have gotten back in my car and driven straight back to Austin and called Patricia to cancel the sale. But I was so close to owning my own land, my own place, and I was tired of being afraid of every little thing. I decided to stay one more night and complete the purchase in the morning. This time, I paid attention to everything. I locked the front door and checked it 3 times. I made note of exactly where I placed every item. I took photos with my phone of the front room, the kitchen, both bedrooms. If anything moved or changed, I'd have evidence. The scratching started around 11 p.m., just like before. Same rhythm, same pattern around the walls, but this time I was ready. I had a hammer from my toolbox, and when the scratching moved to the wall behind my head, I started hammering back. Bang, 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 pause, bang, bang, pause. The scratching stopped immediately. I waited, hammer ready, but nothing. Then after about 5 minutes I heard something new, footsteps, not from inside the walls this time, from outside the house. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the building. They started at the front porch, moved around the east side, then the back, then the west side, then back to the front. One complete circle, then another, then another. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the front window. The footsteps were right outside now, maybe 10 feet from where I was standing. But when I shined the light out into the yard, I saw nothing. The footsteps continued, unaffected by the light. Around and around, always the same pace, the same pattern. After an hour of this, I was ready to crack. The sound was driving me insane, just repetitive enough to be maddening. Just irregular enough that I couldn't predict exactly when the next step would fall. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch with my flashlight. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. I waited, listening, but heard nothing. I walked out into the yard and shined my flashlight around the entire perimeter of the house. No footprints in the dirt, no sign anyone had been there. But when I turned around to go back inside, the front door was closed. I tried the handle, locked. My keys were inside on the kitchen counter. My phone was inside, charging next to my sleeping bag. Everything I owned was inside that house. And I was locked out in the desert at midnight with nothing but a flashlight. I walked around the house, checking every window, all locked. I tried the back door, also locked. There was no way to get back inside without breaking something. That's when I heard the humming. It started low and far away, like a distant generator, but it was coming closer, growing louder, and with it came light, not the single lights I'd seen before, but multiple lights, 7 or 8 of them, approaching from different directions. I was trapped in the open with nowhere to hide. The lights converged on the house, surrounding it at a distance of maybe 50 yards. They were silent now, just hanging in the air about 20 feet off the ground, casting everything in an eerie blue-white glow. I stood in the middle of the yard, turning slowly, trying to keep all the lights in view. They pulsed in unison, growing brighter and dimmer like they were breathing. That's when I realized I could see shapes behind the lights. not solid shapes, but like shadows cast backward, darker spaces that moved independently of the lights themselves. The shadows were human-shaped. As I watched, the lights began to move closer, not all at once, but one at a time, taking turns. The one to my left drifted forward maybe 10 yards, then stopped. The one to my right did the same. Then the one behind me, they were herding me toward the house. I backed up until I was pressed against the front door, fumbling with the handle even though I knew it was locked. The lights continued to close in. And now I could hear something else, voices, faint and distant but definitely human voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. The circle of lights tightened until they were only 20 feet away. Close enough that I could feel heat radiating from them, close enough to see that the shadows behind them weren't shadows at all. They were people, translucent like looking through smoky glass, but definitely human figures, men, women, even children, all standing perfectly still, all looking directly at me. One of the figures, a woman in what looked like a 19th century dress, raised her hand and pointed at me. When she did, all the other figures turned to look in the same direction. That's when I noticed that one of the lights was moving differently than the others. Instead of hovering, it was descending toward the ground. As it got lower, the figure behind it became clearer. It was an old man in coveralls, the same old man whose journal I'd been reading, Patricia's grandfather. He looked exactly like I'd imagined him, from his handwriting, weathered face, tired eyes, work-worn hands. But he was also clearly dead. His skin had a gray pallor, and there was something wrong with his eyes. They reflected the light like an animal's eyes, but without any warmth or life behind them. He walked toward me, passing through the circle of lights like they weren't there. When he was about 5 feet away, he stopped and opened his mouth to speak. No words came out, but I heard his voice anyway, not through my ears, but directly in my mind. "You shouldn't have come here." I tried to respond, tried to ask him what was happening, but my voice wouldn't work. I could only stand there, pressed against the locked door, watching this dead man communicate telepathically. "This land is not for the living," he continued. "We tried to tell them, we tried to warn them, but they never listen." "Who?" I finally managed to whisper. "The people who built Esperanza, the families who came after. Everyone who tries to claim this ground, it belongs to the dead now, it belongs to those who were here first." He gestured to the circle of figures around us. Apache buried here, Mexican settlers who died of plague, American pioneers who starved during drought, all of them tied to this place, all of them guarding it. Guarding it from what? The old man smiled, and it was the most terrible thing I'd ever seen. From the living. From people like you who think they can just take what doesn't belong to them. "I bought the land, it's legal, legal." He laughed, and the sound echoed inside my skull. "White man's law, paper and money, none of that matters here. This ground was sacred before there were deeds or titles or surveyors. It was sacred when the first Apache laid their dead to rest in the cave beneath your feet." "Cave? What cave?" As if he could read my thoughts. The old man pointed toward the ground, 300 yards north of the house, hidden entrance behind a pile of stones. "That's where it starts. That's where they all go when they die." "I don't understand." "You will. Everyone who stays here long enough understands eventually. The land calls to the dead, and the dead protect the land. It's been that way for 1,000 years. The circle of lights was moving closer again, and I could hear more voices now. Dozens of them all speaking in different languages. Apache, Spanish, English, others I couldn't identify. "What do you want from me?" "Leave, tonight, drive away and never come back. Sell the land to someone else, let them make their own choice." "And if I don't?" The old man's expression never changed, but somehow I could feel his sadness. "Then you'll join us. Maybe not tonight, maybe not next month, but eventually. The land will claim you like it claimed all the others." "The people from Esperanza," he nodded. "Among others, 83 people buried in that cave, 83 people who thought they could tame this desert." The lights were only 10 feet away now, and the heat was becoming unbearable. I could smell something burning, not wood or gasoline, but something organic, something like hair and flesh. "Choose now," the old man said, "while you still can." I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The lights surrounded me completely. And behind each light was a figure from the past, all of them waiting to see what I would do. "I'll leave," I whispered. "I'll leave right now." The old man nodded, and suddenly I heard the click of the front door unlocking behind me. I turned and grabbed the handle, pulling it open. "Take your things and go," he said. "Don't look back." I grabbed my sleeping bag, my keys, my phone, and ran for my car. The lights followed me, keeping pace as I loaded my gear into the Honda. When I started the engine, they moved aside to create a path toward the gate. I drove through that gauntlet of lights and dead faces, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. At the gate, I stopped and looked back one last time. The lights had formed a single line stretching from the house to the mountains, like a road made of spirits. And at the front of the line, the old man raised his hand in what might have been a farewell or a warning. I drove back to Austin that night. Stopping only for gas and coffee, I called Patricia from a Starbucks in Fredericksburg at 6 in the morning. The deal's off, I told her. I can't buy the land. What happened? I almost told her everything. Almost described the lights and the voices and her grandfather's ghost explaining the truth about those 40 acres. But who would believe that? I changed my mind. The location's too remote for what I want to do. She was quiet for a long time. Mr. Morrison, did you see something out there? I saw enough. My grandfather, before he died, he told me stories about that place, about the people buried there. I never believed him until I tried to sell it the first time. This isn't your first time selling it. Third time. The previous 2 buyers both changed their minds after spending a night on the property. They wouldn't say why, just like you. Then why do you keep trying? Because someday someone's going to buy it who doesn't care about ghost stories. Someone who will develop the land, build houses, bring in lots of people. And when that happens, what? I don't know. But my grandfather used to say the dead were patient because they had all the time in the world, but they weren't endlessly patient. Sooner or later, if people kept disturbing their rest, they'd have to do more than just warn them away. I thought about the 83 people buried in the hidden cave, all the families who disappeared over the years. Maybe that's what happened to Esperanza. Maybe that was 6 months ago. I found different land outside Fredericksburg, more expensive, but with a clean history and neighbors close enough that I'm never truly alone. I built a small cabin, set up solar panels, started the off-grid life I'd been dreaming about. But I still think about those 40 acres outside Marfa. I check the real estate listing sometimes, wondering if Patricia is still trying to sell them. So far, they haven't been relisted. Last month, I drove back out that way. Not to the property, I'm not that stupid, but close enough to look down FM 2810 from the main highway. There's a new gate now, with a no trespassing sign in both English and Spanish. But at night, if you know where to look, you can still see lights moving across that desert. The Marfa lights are famous, documented, studied by scientists and tourists alike. They appear south of town and are generally considered harmless, but these lights appear north of town, on land that's been bought and abandoned more times than anyone wants to count. These lights move with purpose and intelligence. These lights guard something that was never meant to be disturbed. If you're ever driving through West Texas and you see a great deal on land near Marfa, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. Some bargains aren't worth what they cost. And if you're reading this, Patricia Hernandez, please stop trying to sell that land. Some things should stay buried. Some places should be left to the dead. The Apache knew it. Your grandfather knew it. Now I know it too. Some ground was sacred before there were deeds or titles or property rights. Some places belong to those who were there first, who died protecting what they loved. Let them rest in peace. I never published this story anywhere but here. I never told my friends or family the real reason I changed my mind about the Texas land. But 2 weeks ago, I got a message on Reddit from someone named Texas Road Tripper 47. Dude, I think I found the place you wrote about. FM 2810 outside Marfa. The gate's been cut and there are fresh tire tracks. Someone's been out there recently. Should I check it out? I wrote back immediately. Don't whatever you do, don't go out there at night. But it's been 3 days now and Texas Road Tripper 47 hasn't responded. I keep telling myself he probably just lost interest. Moved on to other things. People on Reddit do that all the time. But I can't stop thinking about those fresh tire tracks, about someone cutting that gate and driving out to land that should have stayed empty. I'm writing this because I need people to understand. This isn't just a story I made up for internet points. This is real. This happened. And if someone else is out there now on that land, they're in danger. If you know someone who's been looking at property in West Texas, if you've heard anyone mention a great deal on 40 acres outside Marfa, please share this with them. Please make sure they understand what they're getting into. Because the dead are patient, but they're not endlessly patient. And sooner or later, if people keep disturbing their rest, they're going to do more than just warn them away. The land remembers. It remembers everything.